Hello, hello. Okay. Check mic test. I'm just gonna check my mic first before I go fully live. But wait for me, guys. Hello, hello. Okay. Check mic test. I'm just gonna check my mic first before. Okay, I can hear myself now. Okay, guys. This is your boy Shrimp here, back again for more art and adventure. So last time I did this sketch of practicing some different kinds of shapes from circles, squares, and ovals. And yeah, guess what? Did some faces out of it. And as you can see on the thumbnail, I added that on this cover photo for now, for the thumbnail, and including with our new volume, for the volume 3 or 4, the Death Mage Who Doesn't Want a Fourth Time. So yeah, look forward for this new volume, guys. It's gonna be very interesting. And anyway, thank you guys for coming here. If you're watching here it in live, or if you are watching it in an archive, thank you very much for wasting your time here. uh, well, thank you once again. But anyway, here we are again, and I'm gonna. Where's my? Sorry about that. Alright, here we go. Okay. Oh, what the heck? Okay, there we go. So yeah, this is my sketch last time. I'm just going to complete this last sketch over here, and then I'm gonna move forward to another layer, and yeah, I'll start adding more sketches. But this time, I'll definitely do some few full body figures, not just the heads, and I will also experiment with different kinds of shapes, different kinds of sizes, so that we can learn more of how to sketch anatomy and sketch scales of a human body, because every human has a different kind of size and different kind of structure. So we're gonna learn that today. And yeah, I'll try to be a bit more goofy, more free, like a One Piece art style, and see what I can do with it. And also, guys, today for the art mage who doesn't want a full time, uh, we're in chapter. Let me see. Chapter am I? Okay. Like I explained earlier, we're on volume 3. We're now on chapter 52. Okay. So, uh, this will be the beginning, I think, of from the last time that we've read. Sorry, guys, I have a bit of a issue with my memory. So, uh, yeah, I didn't really thought about it. Let's just go and dive in for the story for today. We'll probably recall what happened last time.
Chapter
So, yep, pretty much last time that I could remember that, yeah, they went against the dragon that was left underneath the castle, and then the spear, which was blessed by the gods and was wielded by the hero that went and destroyed the country of the Titans, was actually has a bit of a sentient entity on it, and so it went against Vandalay and tried to destroy the artifact or the technology that was capable of reviving his mother. So I think that was the last scenes from what I could remember. Yeah, and now we're actually, if I remember from the last time yeah, I think they're going through the consequence or the uh, what's the word? Like the the effects of what Vanity did against that spear. Yeah, that's what will happen probably to this chapter. So we'll see what will happen else. So we'll probably be discovering new gods or probably new characters that will be affected due to the existence of the so-called existence of the Dampier named Vandally. So other than that, while we're listening to the story, I'll be continuing my sketch over here, and I think I've explained last time that the character I'm going to draw over here will be a main character that I did for my original story. Uh, yeah. this will be a character of a female, a boyish female, and I'll sketch her right here pointing at us. I'll make her cool, real, and a bit fiery, I might say. Okay, so yeah, I'll continue with this for now. Anyway, if you find some things that you want to suggest to me, anything that you might find that I need to improve, if you're a professional or you have more experience in sketching than me, please help. You could definitely leave a comment to help me if I have some things that I need to improve. And also, what am I gonna say? I lost my trail of thought again. Uh, uh, yeah, I totally lost it. Oh, sorry, guys. Well, anyways, let's not drag this out a little bit more because I might lose a lot of time. I'm also planning to play a bit of Monster Hunter, but I'm not gonna stream it later. So here we are. Okay, guys, I'll begin this stream with the audiobook playing, and I'll mute myself. Okay, here we go.
Chapter 52, What's Impossible is Impossible. Chapter 52, What's Impossible is Impossible. So then let's think of a method that is possible. Volume 3, March of the Eclipse King's Army. On this day, tears of blood fell from every statue of Yipion, the god of ice serving Peria, the goddess of water and knowledge, in the Barngaya continent and throughout the rest of the world. Those who had received Yipion's divine protection heard the scream of a god and lost consciousness. The cause of that was vandally breaking and destroying the soul of Ice Age, the magic spear of ice. But as the Ice Age's consciousness never returned to Yipion's main body, even Yipion, who had lost a clone of himself, did not know this. The people feared this omen, worrying that it signaled the return of the Demon King or the second resurrection of the fallen champion Zakat, and the clergymen of every region became very busy. A heavy atmosphere had fallen upon the audience chamber that was well organized despite its cleaning being incomplete. Most of those who had challenged the dragon golem, excluding the stone golems, still remained here. Bone Wolf, Bone Bird and the other undead animals had turned into a bone chimera that let out a strange cry of multiple beasts at once. The only ones who weren't here were Vandali, the one who had repaired this audience chamber, and Bone Man, whose spine and hips had been crushed and was still unable to move on his own. They were still beneath the royal castle, in order to find out whether the destroyed resurrection device could be repaired or not. After Vandali destroyed Ice Age's soul, everyone received an incredible quantity of experience points that even Borkus had never earned in a single battle before. The dragon golem made of Orichalcum by a goddess that had been challenged by the S-class destined divine spear of ice Mikhail and his companions. It had remained standing even after claiming the lives of all of Mikhail's companions and inflicting a fatal wound on Mikhail himself. Because they had dealt the final blow to such a foe, everyone gained an enormous amount of experience points. As a result, Vigoro had become a rank 7 ghoul tyrant, the highest, most powerful type of ghoul that had been historically witnessed. His enormous body was now over 2.5 meters tall, matching the height of the Titans, and he had grown 2 additional arms. He was a powerful, 4-armed warrior. Ritu and Saria's armor looked the same as before, but they had become rank 6 high magic armors and their spirit form skills had improved. They looked far more human than their previous log-like, vaguely human-shaped bodies. Though Vandali would consider them to be like a full-body, white version of the silhouettes depicting the criminal in a way that their age and gender couldn't be determined in mystery manga. In fact, their spirit forms were bulging in various places. It was like some form of joke. And the levels of the other members had increased as well. Bone Man, who wasn't present here, had probably increased his rank, and Vandali's job level had likely increased significantly as well. However, the atmosphere in here wasn't a happy celebration of these facts. They sure are taking their time. Several hours had already passed, but there was no sign of Vandali returning. He hadn't suffered any injuries other than giving Eleonora a little of his own blood, but he had expended a large amount of his mana and his surpass limits skill had been active. There was no way that he wasn't feeling fatigued. However, nobody could suggest that they go to see what was happening. Everyone could remember Vandali's shock upon learning that the resurrection device had been destroyed. Among everyone gathered in this place, Eleonora had known Vandali for the least amount of time, and as she had been sold by her parents when she was young, she had no fond memories of her family. But she knew how much Vandali wished for the resurrection of his mother. His mother had been killed while he was young. That alone isn't unusual, it is an unhappy story one could hear anywhere. Even as the surviving child bears a large emotional wound, the sorrow must be put in the past in order to move on. Just as Eleonora had put the fact that she had been sold by her parents in the past in order to continue living. Even she, who possessed an affinity for the time attribute, could not erase the past. But Vandali-sama possesses power. So much power that he might be able to achieve the perfect resurrection of the dead that was impossible even for the goddess. It might be possible. If he reached a hand out, it might reach it. If he tried his best, he might make it happen. That was why Vandali was not trying to put his mother's death in the past. In fact, he had almost reached it. Dasa's resurrection. But his efforts had been hindered and trampled underfoot for reasons that there was no way he could understand. It was terrifying to simply imagine his rage, shock and frustration. Vandali-sama is someone who hates those that try to take happiness away from him. He feels anger towards them, he hates them, he curses them, he fears them. He feels true happiness at their ruin and takes comfort in their destruction. Eleonora had felt this more powerfully than anything else when Vandali had destroyed the souls of Sir Krent and the subordinate vampires who had tried to kill Terra. That was why he had also destroyed the soul of Ice Age today. But unlike when he had destroyed Sir Krent, Vandali was likely unsatisfied with the destruction of Ice Age's soul. If I could comfort him, I would want to do so, but I'm not scared, so why am I thinking these things? Eleonora let out a sigh and placed a hand on her chest. This was the spot where Ice Age's ice had pierced her, and the wound had healed without a trace due to Vandali's magic and blood. Before, she would have been scared if her life had been saved and she had not been of any use. She would have been terrified that she would be discarded for being useless and unnecessary. But the emotion in her chest now was clearly something other than fear. A nausea-like discomfort and pain, as if her chest was being squeezed. Do I want to comfort him because of these mysterious emotions? I have not felt the need to gain Vandali-sama's favor through straightforward methods until now. Even if Eleonora didn't do such things, Vandali still treated her well. So just why? Is the Holy Sun still underground? Asked Nuaza, who had entered the audience chamber while Eleonora was deeply reflecting on her inner feelings. Yes, replied Zadyrus. He still has not come out. I see there was something that I wanted to apologize to him for, said Nuaza. Are you talking about when you, me and the kid went underground 2 years ago? Borkus, who had been silently frowning with the remaining part of his face, interrupted. If so, I'm the one who needs to apologize, not you. I'm the one who asked him to find Zandia Joukjin and Jeena. If he had told me about the resurrection device beforehand and I'd thought about the possibility of Mikhail's spear being an artifact with its own mind, if I'd never lost to that bastard Mikhail 200 years ago in the first place, if I'd broken that spear, things wouldn't have turned out this way. When they met, Borkus had resisted Vandali's death attribute charm. He could probably resist it even now if he tried. But he had stopped resisting it of his own will. He had realized that doing so was meaningless. A brat whose expressionless face made it impossible to tell what he was thinking or where he was looking. That brat had brought the happiness of energetic, everyday life back to the previously empty Talersheim, while being given nothing in return. Vandali could have received plenty of compensation if he had asked for it. For Borkus and the other undead titans, such compensation would have been a necessary price to pay. The safe life they had in the city was because Vandali had repaired the walls. They were able to enjoy delicious food because he made flavorings using his magic. He had even repaired the enormous rooms in the royal castle. The goodwill and respect he had received was only natural considering his actions, and though the title of Holy Sun was originally something that Nuaza had started using, it was now a fitting title for Vandali to have. He still hadn't recovered the corpses of Zandia and Jeena, but he had said that he would do so in the next few decades. His enemies would be the pure-breed vampires who would likely be impossible to defeat even with all the heroes of Talersheim gathered, so facing them within the next few decades could even be considered too early. And now that Borkus had been on the verge of repay the debt that he owed to Vandali, it had become so distant again. How pathetic. How could he call himself an A-class adventurer when he couldn't even complete the one job he needed to do after receiving all the rewards in advance? No, that is not it. However, it seemed that the thing Nuaza wanted to apologize to Vandali for was something else. Huh? Then what is it? Asked Borkus. I have willingly destroyed a part of the church that the Holy Sun was gracious enough to take the time and effort to restore. I have already apologized to Vida and Peria, so, destroyed? Eleonora repeated. Do you mean the statue of Yupion, the god of ice? Said Nuaza. It had merged with the pedestal, so I carefully detached it and buried it in the ground. In many churches, statues of gods other than the main god of the church are enshrined. Not all gods have statues gathered in every church, but even if Yupion was a subordinate god, he had existed since 100,000 years ago. Unlike Alda and his subordinates who were clearly the enemy, it wouldn't have been strange for Yupion's statue to be in Taylorsheim's Church of Vida. Nuaza had buried that statue. Is it alright for you to do something like that? Though Saria didn't breathe, she gasped and held her breath. Though Zadaris and the other ghouls wouldn't have immediately understood as they had never built churches themselves, statues of gods have a special meaning in this world. This is a world where the existence of gods is known to be true, so an action such as Nuaza's would be a literal display of a lack of fear towards the gods. The armies of the Amid Empire and its nations that worship Aldu as its official religion often destroy statues of Vida, but that is because their god instructs them to. However, there was no sign of hesitation in Nuaza's mummified face. Of course. Yupion has clearly declared through his follower in Ice Age that we are his enemies. However, we have not done anything to be ashamed of, nor have we been punished. So just as we are divine enemies to that god, it is only natural that we treat him as our enemy. That god regarded everyone here as enemies, including Vida who Nuaza and the others worshipped. So even if he was a subordinate god of peril like Tristan, who had sired the mer people with Vida, there was no reason to hold back. However, it is a fact that I have buried and disposed of a statue that the Holy Sun restored, said Nuaza. Incidentally, the sun has set and a considerable amount of time has passed. Should we not go and see what is happening? Huh? Borkus looked surprised. Has it been that long? Well, we can't see the sun or the stars from this room, Rita pointed out. I suppose undead have a duller sense of time. But too much time has certainly passed, Zadaris said in agreement. All right, let's go and see what's happening, said Vigoro. Though they had been doubting how wise it would be to all go down together, now that there was an opportunity and because everyone was curious about how Vandali was doing, they all descended underground once more. Jayu? What is the matter, everyone? And then they encountered Bone Man before they reached the chamber. What about you, Bone Man-san? Asked Saria. Did you have your bones repaired? Yes. And I have a message from my lord. A message? Eleonora repeated. What did Vandali-sama say? He said, I will be here for a while longer to investigate the device a little more. Also, I am hungry so please bring me some food. Thank you. I'd thought that he wouldn't eat or drink because of the shock, but it seems that he's more composed than we thought, said Vigoro. All right, we'll all be making a special dish for Botchan. Rita announced. Everyone except me, that is. She added. Rita, you are a maid, so you should at least learn to make simple dishes, said Saria, scolding her. No, now that I think about it, the boy is the only one among us who knows how to cook properly, Zadaris pointed out. I could manage if it's just roasting meat, said Eleonora. Even I could do that, said Borkus. Bone Chimera let out a cry. If these women were on Earth, they would have been criticized for their lack of feminine skills. Vandali slept properly at night, ate breakfast, lunch and dinner without skipping a meal and, of course, took baths. After investigating the resurrection device for a month in this way, Vandali came to the conclusion that repairing it was possible, but impossible for now. The resurrection device was truly something that had been made by the goddess Vida. Even though Vandali had acquired the alchemy skill, his skills were still average and he couldn't make any sense of it at all. It was like a caveman who had just invented stone tools trying to hand-build a supercomputer out of semiconductors. However, Vandali had the Glum transmutation skill. With this skill that was capable of turning inanimate objects into glums to change their shape freely, restoring the broken device to its original form was possible. Ice Age's ice had torn holes in the resurrection device and severed parts of it. But fortunately, the components hadn't exploded or warped into a different shape, nor had any important parts been blown away completely. It was possible to return it to its original form. However, the essential Golem transmutation skill was not working on the components of the resurrection device. Even with the use of appraisal, Vandali couldn't learn anything about the resurrection device's components other than things like a mysterious alloy and a mysterious gemstone. They repelled his mana even more strongly than Orichalcum and refused to become golems. It was likely that either Orichalcum had been included as materials or they were made of some unknown god-made metal. This was a fantasy world of swords and magic, after all. Since orichalcum existed, it wouldn't be strange for Hirokan or other legendary divine metals to exist as well. Note: a legendary metal in Japanese fiction. It has multiple kanji reading variations that can mean vast fire gold, crimson gold or sun red gold. However, Vandali's golem transmutation had leveled up after the battle with the dragon golem, and he had become able to make orichalcum stay in a fixed shape after manipulating it. If golem transmutation increased in level even further, it might be possible to return this device to its original state one day. It might be impossible even after the skill's level reached its maximum, or the device might not function normally even after the shape of its components had been restored. However, that was why Vandali wanted to find other ways of repairing the resurrection device. Other than leveling up his golem transformation skill or discover another way to resurrect Darsa. Using Eleonora's time attribute magic to return the device to before it was destroyed would be difficult, apparently. I was taken in by Berkine because I have an affinity for the time attribute. If you look at it positively, this attribute is one that becomes great over time. If you look at it negatively, it is an attribute that fails to live up to its name and cannot accomplish anything great except when wielded by the absolute best of the best, Eleonora explained. The time attribute is the attribute ruled by Rickelant, the genie of time and magic, an attribute that does not exist in origin. However, like the space attribute, there are few people or monsters with an affinity for it, and it does not have easily understood effects like the other air attributes. Of course, once the skill reaches level 10, it would be possible to stop time, rewind it, look into the past and future and reach the limits of human knowledge. However, a mage of Eleonora's level could only accelerate time around herself to speed up her movements, or spend multiple hours to look several days into the past or a few seconds into the future. Even if I received mana from you, Vandali-sama, it would be questionable as to whether I would be able to rewind time by even 1 second. Reassuring Eleonora that her apologies were unnecessary, Vandali tried to think of other methods. If possible, a method that would definitely work would be to ask the goddess Vida who had made this device and her subordinates to repair it. She was the one who had built it, so it should be possible for her to repair it. And since she had been conducting research on how to resurrect the dead, it was possible that there were other similar devices outside of Talersheim. The problem was that Vandali didn't know where those would be. It was said that Vida was lying dormant in the southern region of the Barngaya continent after her defeat at the hands of Alder. But not only would it take time to search the region that made up a third of the continent's landmass that was filled with devil's nests inhabited by unknown, powerful monsters, it would also be too dangerous. As for methods other than using the resurrection device, Vandali couldn't think of any methods other than reading through the documents in the Mages Guilds and the Kingdom's archives in human societies and learning about the ancient past from lashes and the spirits of mages. In other words, I've come to the conclusion that I have no choice but to work hard and gather information at the same time, Vandali told Darsa. I'm sorry. The 5th summer of Vandali's 3rd lifetime had passed, and he was now 5 years old. Don't worry about it. It isn't your fault, Darsa reassured him. And if you wanted, I could even become an undead. No. And there is no vessel for you anyway, is there? If Darsa's dead body was available, Vandali might have considered it. However, High Priest Gordon had made a display of burning her alive, so there was nothing remaining of it other than the small bone fragment that Darsa's spirit currently resided in. Recreating her entire body from just this bone fragment would be impossible even for Vandali. Then how about using a suit of armor and making me a living armor like Saria-chan and Rita-chan? Darsa suggested. There are no suits of armor shaped like the ones that Saria and Rita are inhabiting readily available, Vandali told her. No, I didn't mean that I wanted armor shaped like theirs. I would like a nice looking suit of armor, but those ones are a little. Vandali also felt little desire to recommend that Darsa inhabit a bikini armor or high leg leotard armor, so he was happy to hear that she wasn't enthusiastic about them. Though now that Vandali calmly looked back on it, when Darsa was alive, she had exposed more of her body than would normally be expected. But now that he had spent the past few years in the company of ghoul women who exposed more of themselves than Darsa, perhaps he wouldn't mind that anymore. In fact, he was thinking that Eleonora, who had recently joined his companions, exposed herself very little. Of course, he had never voiced that opinion. He could only see a future where she would strip off her clothes if he did. But this is causing you nothing but trouble, Vandali. I wouldn't mind if you used a suit of armor, you should mind. Please mind it. Vandali interrupted Darsa, as she seemed to be on the verge of making a strange decision. Vandali somehow managed to take Dasa's mind off the idea of becoming a living armor by suggesting creating a body for Dasa by processing the corpses of creatures like monsters. Vandali had never imagined that he would become Dr. Frankenstein in a fantasy world, but sewing corpses together was likely possible. It would be very difficult to make one that resembled Dasa exactly, however. Wasn't there a spirit of a bizarre murderer somewhere who could teach him how to do it? Vandali decided that he should at least ask the pure-breed vampires' souls before breaking them. Also, what is this God-Slayer skill that I learned? Vandali wondered. He had acquired a skill that was even more difficult to examine than his soul break skill. The fact that it was a unique skill probably meant that only Vandali had it. It was highly likely that nobody knew about this skill. Wouldn't it be a skill that kills gods after all? Dasa suggested. Vandali had tried asking everyone, but nobody, including Dasa, knew the answer. Vandali thought that if this were a game, it would probably be something that simply granted bonus damage against gods and their followers. As Ice Age was now just a stick of orichalcum, there were no followers of any gods nearby. There was no way to test it out. Also, the experience granted by the Dragon Golem had caused the level of his Golem Transmuter job to reach the maximum limit, so Vandali had decided to go and undergo another job change tomorrow. The attribute value increases of Golem Transmuter were inclined towards intelligence, so his agility had decreased quite a lot, but his strength and stamina were close to their base values. His mana hadn't increased as much as he'd expected, but the bonuses to his skills had come in handy. These were Vandali's thoughts on the job. Name, Vandali race, Damper, Dark Elf age, 5 years old title : Ghoul King job, Golem Transmuter level, 100 job history, death attribute Mage attributes, vitality, 115 mana, 224,506,933 strength, 79 agility, 80 stamina, 83 intelligence, 392 passive skills, superhuman strength, level 1 rapid healing, level 3 death attribute magic, level 5 status effect resistance, level 5 magic resistance, level 1 dark vision mental corruption, level 10 death attribute charm, level 5 chant revocation, level 3 strength and followers, level 7 automatic mana recovery, level 3 active skills, blood sucking, level 3 surpass limits, level 4 golem transmutation, level 6, level up. No attribute magic, level 4 mana control, level 4 spirit form, level 3, level up. Carpentry, level 4 engineering, level 3 cooking, level 2 alchemy, level 3 unarmed fighting technique, level 2 soul break, level 2, level up. Multicast, level 2, level up. Long distance control, level 2, level up. Unique skills. Godslayer, level 1 curses experience gained in previous life not carried over cannot learn existing jobs unable to gain experience independently. Job explanation, Golem Transmuter, a job that influences the Golem Transmutation skill and other skills that can be gained from that skill. It grants bonuses to a wide range of skills, but in exchange, the growth of attribute values is quite limited. The requirement for acquiring this job is to have a level 1 skill in Golem Transmutation, but there is currently not a single person or monster in Lambda other than Vandali who possesses this skill. Skill explanation, long distance control, a skill that allows the user to continue to manipulate parts of the body that are separated from the main body, such as severed limbs. It is mainly used by high-rank undead of races such as skeletons, zombies, living armors and dullahans. On rare occasions, it can be possessed by monsters with tremendous vitality. As the level of the skill increases, the distance at which body parts can be controlled as well as the number of parts that can be controlled at a given time increase. Of course, there are no people who possess this skill. Also, there is no known method of training that would allow the acquisition of this skill. Side Story Chapter 2, The Only Remaining God of the 11 Gods. Alder, the god of law and fate. The only god of creation still remaining in Lambda excluding the subordinate gods. The god who possessed the most power even including the evil gods. The source of that power lay in the followers and servants who respected him and, most importantly, the number of believers who offered him their prayers. He had suffered deep wounds during the battle against the Demon King and the one against Vida who was supposed to be his ally, but even so, Alder's power was vast. He was depicted as an austere-looking, white-haired old man holding a heavy book, a stern-eyed young man holding a large sickle of judgment in his left hand and a torch in his right, or as a shining moon. All of these were Alder's forms, his symbols. Alder had been worried about many things in the past few tens of thousands of years. What he was worried about, of course, was the future of the world of Lambda that he loved. To be more precise, he had always been worrying. He had contemplated, listened to the voices of the people, thinking about how he could keep the world in the light, how to preserve its order, how to bring about and maintain peace, how to spread these ideals to the people and make them understand them. He was always thinking about these. However, things had not gone favorably in the past few tens of thousands of years. I suppose this means it is time to revise the policy that has been in place up until now. It is truly irritating that I have no choice but to agree with the words of that god of reincarnation. However, Alder whispered to himself, trying to gather his thoughts. Please wait, said another voice. Kuratos, the god of records who was a subordinate god of Alder's and his close aide, had appeared at his side. Kuratos was one of the servants, equivalent to angels on earth, created by Alder shortly after the birth of the world, who had risen to become a god. He did not possess his own divinity, he was merely Alder's close aide, and this was symbolized by the book that he was holding in his hand. My lord, there is no need to pay any heed to the words of one such as Rodcorti, Kuratos advised. The development he speaks of is merely a pretense. Calm yourself, Kuratos, said Alder, reassuring his servant. It is not that I have acknowledged that there is a need for the development of which Rodcorti speaks. Rodcorti had told Alder and the other gods many times that this world was inferior to other worlds and that development was necessary. However, these words did not ring true in the hearts of Alder and his companions. It was little more than a vague, meaningless complaint. The development and passing on of culture and art, the stable continuation of a civilization. These are very wonderful things. But for Alder and the other gods, these were not the things that needed to be prioritized the most. For the god of law and fate, Alder and his subordinate gods, the gods that supported him such as Yipion, these were times of war. The demon king and Vida had been defeated, but the evil gods were still making hidden movements while monsters and the races created by Vida were building their nests. The first thing that needed to be prioritized was the battle against the evil gods, the monsters and the races created by Vida. What was the use in prioritizing the world's development over that? And then Alder had realized the true intentions behind the development that Rodcorti wished for. Rodcorti simply desired for the population of this world to increase. Because as the number of souls going around in the cycle of reincarnation increased, that God's power would increase with it. But in contrast, Alder did not particularly want for the population of people in this world to increase. If the number of people increased too much, the number of resources required to sustain them would increase, many factions would form and new nations would be established. And then there would be conflict between them, making order more difficult to maintain. It was already difficult to maintain with the current population of less than 100 million, if Lambda's total population were to increase to the multiple billions that Rodcorti was requesting, there was no telling what kind of disorder and chaos would be brought about. It was terrifying just to imagine. To begin with, development is not needed for the preservation of the world, said Alder. It is absurd to use other worlds as an example. He admired science and technology that did not require the use of magic, but was that something that was necessary in Lambda? Electricity, automobiles, gunpowder and dynamite, aircraft, computers, stock trading. The benefits brought about by these things were surely great, and it would certainly make the lives of the people more rich and convenient. But would this outweigh the disadvantages brought about by the existence of such things? In fact, the existence of those things caused the destruction of nature for the sake of generating energy. Were they not also the causes of some wars and conflicts? Automobiles caused tens of thousands of people to die in accidents every year. Gunpowder, dynamite and aircraft were utilized in wars. Computers gave rise to new crimes, while stock trading caused people to concern themselves over things with no physical form and bring themselves to ruin. The most foolish thing of all was that in worlds where these things existed, there was still no complete system established to control the people who used them, and the systems that did exist were not followed. Magic already existed in Lambda. There were drawbacks to its existence. People used it to kill one another. So why should the seeds of disaster from other worlds be planted in this one to add to that? That was why Rodcorti's words made little impression on Alder. Alder would simply answer that each world had its own circumstances. That was the consensus of opinion held by the other gods who supported him as well. Then what policy would you be revising? Asked Kuratos. The Demon King's transmigration system and Vida's transmigration system. Without their destruction, this world cannot possibly know peace, my lord. Alda's objective was to destroy the transmigration systems of this world other than Rodcortes, bringing ruin to the evil gods, monsters and the races created by Vida. The transmigration system that Rodcorte had created and was now ruling over, unlike Rodcorte himself, was perfect. However, the other two systems were problematic products. The transmigration system created by the Demon King was still continuing to spawn monsters in this world. It was even used by the evil gods to willingly reincarnate themselves and be reborn. It was making some contribution to the people in the form of dungeons, but that was a matter of a single benefit in exchange for 1,000 disadvantages. And souls were not needed for merely supplying dungeons with monsters. It was not impossible for dungeons to generate and arrange soulless puppets, though this would require Alda to wait for the revival of Ricalant, the genie of time and magic. Note: there is a Japanese phrase that is something along the lines of 100 harms and not a single gain, that is something like all pain, no gain, or having no redeeming features in English. This is a variation of that saying where there is a single gain in exchange for the 100 harms, but then the alteration of 100 to 1,000 really emphasizes that the disadvantages are very significant. And the system created by Vida was a very unstable product. As it was merely an imitation of the original system, that was to be expected. It seemed that Vida had been thinking of moving the transmigration of every creature in this world to that system one day, but that would have been far too dangerous an endeavor. Vida had mated with monsters to produce new races in order to stabilize her system and given birth to vampires partially to have them assist it. Entrusting such an unstable system with the souls of the world's people was unthinkable. "Many brave souls have fought for your ideals," said Curatos. For their sake, he had recorded all of history up until this point. Therefore, he was someone who used the past as a reference when making decisions on things. Alda gave Curatos a bitter smile. "I am certainly not considering giving up on putting an end to Vida's folly," he said. "I am thinking about whether I should revise the way I am doing things." Curatos let out a sigh of relief. And then he began trying to record Alda's thoughts. "How are you going to revise your methods?" asked Curatos. The way Alda had done things up until now was to make his teachings clear and then leave the specific methods of putting them into practice up to the people. Gods were those who guided the people, not rulers. This fact was one thing that Alda could agree with the gods of other worlds upon. Alda's teachings stated that the evil gods and members of the races created by Vida were to be exterminated alongside those who didn't follow his doctrine, and that relying on knowledge that originated in other worlds such as the things left behind by Zakat was forbidden. He had delivered these teachings through a divine message to the more capable individuals among his believers. However, the contents of his divine message had been twisted as it spread from those who received it, and there were many cases where they were not putting his teachings into practice correctly. A recent example of this had occurred in the main church of Alda in the Omid Empire. The extermination of Vida's races and the knowledge that had been brought from other worlds had been prioritized too much over the extermination of the evil gods and their servants. And the empire had been utilizing this in their politics too much. Because of this, Hukaka, the evil god of joyful life, was being allowed to extend his influence from the shadows. "I will tell them precisely what needs to be prioritized," said Alda. "Until now, I have been hoping that the people would make the correct decisions on their own, but it seems I have been wishing for things from the past for too long." "An unavoidable decision," Curatos said in agreement. "Even you are far from omniscient and omnipotent after all, my lord." "Precisely. Even from this divine realm, there are many things I cannot see. That is the reason I had hoped that the people would put my divine message into practice in a way that is suitable for them." "However, then what would you have them prioritize?" Curatos questioned Alda once more. "Should it be the extermination of the races spawned by Vida after all? Or perhaps you would limit their targets to the filthy creatures with monster blood mixed in their veins?" The influence of the races created by Vida had decreased greatly over the past 100,000 years. There were few that possessed their own independent nations, and even those that did exist were on the scale of several thousand citizens. There were exceptions such as the pure-breed vampires, but they generally didn't possess much gathered strength. Crushing each race individually to exterminate them all would be relatively simple. That was likely why Curatos guessed that Alda would prioritize this. "No, Curatos," said Alda, however. "I am planning to tell the people that the battle against the evil gods should be prioritized. My lord. There are still many who have preserved their strength, including the evil god of joyful life. Belwood Dono is still in a slumber after he and the evil god of sinful chains defeated each other. Is this acceptable?" As Kuratos said, the evil gods had preserved their strength better than the races created by Vida had. Not only were there those such as the evil god of joyful life who had spread their roots into the depths of society, there were those who had established great hordes of monsters who worshipped them, and even those that had established their own nations of people who worshipped them on islands separate from the continents. "I am sure that the battle against the evil gods will be fierce and harsh," said Alder. "However, if the extermination of Vida's races is prioritized, the evil gods will utilize that and take advantage of it. You have recorded the events that befell the Divine Spear of Ice, Mikhail, have you not?" Mikhail, the Divine Spear of Ice, was a hero who had drawn Alder's attention in recent times. He had been putting Alder's doctrine and the champion Bellwood's teachings into practice. Alder had been planning to one day welcome him to join him at least as a heroic spirit servant, or depending on his achievements, a heroic god like Bellwood, but "I have indeed," replied Kuratos. "That valuable individual was robbed from us by the darkness. Mikhail's spirit had been stolen by something. It was likely the doing of the subordinates of the evil god of joyful life, or the subordinates of an evil god haunting the region beyond the boundary mountain range. Whoever it was, those wicked gods utilized the conflict between Vida and myself in order to benefit from it," said Alder. "With that being the case, the extermination of those gods should be prioritized over exterminating the weakened races created by Vida. Also, there are some among those races who have already established a position for themselves among the people. Among the races created by Vida, those such as Titans, Beastmen and Dark Elves had already established their existence among the people. Commoners, slaves, laborers, miners, prostitutes, adventurers, craftsmen. Most of them were in the lower positions of society, but there were also nobles and royalty among them. As they were not evil in nature, there was no small number of countries who had accepted them as a part of their societies. Even if I instructed for them to be destroyed unsparingly, my true will would not be conveyed. The people cannot be told about the transmigration systems, after all. If Alder were to instruct the people to slay their virtuous neighbors simply for being members of races created by Vida, they would criticize him as an unjust god and many would oppose. Alder expected that his followers would be able to make the other people understand, but it was still not a favorable choice. Therefore, the spearhead must be pointed towards the evil gods first, Alder concluded. During that time, we must support the people and build plans for destroying Vida's races. "I see," said Kuratos. "However, would the people understand your intentions immediately, my lord? That is where the problem lies. Even if Alder used a divine message to convey his will, he could not meet the people and talk to them directly. Information needed to be reduced so that the people could understand, and even then, his believers who received it would need to translate it into their own words. Only then could the will of a god be conveyed. If a god's brain was a supercomputer, the brain of an average person was an older generation handheld console. That was why it was necessary for Alder to choose a powerful individual among the believers when delivering a divine message in order to ensure that he and the believer were on the same wavelength. If he were to choose an unskillful individual, they might not understand the meaning of the divine message at all and could misinterpret it. In some cases, they might not even realize that they had heard a divine message. That was why it was correct to send only short, simple to understand divine messages to chosen saints. It would be different if Alder were to descend upon the earth like he did during the Age of the Gods, or welcome the souls of heroes such as Mikhail into the divine realm after death. Would they accept your will even if it is conveyed? Asked Kuratos. We subordinate gods and servants have been condemning Vida's races as evil up until now, after all. As the people could be told about the transmigration system, the extermination of Vida's races was justified as being in the name of great justice, but it seems that this has backfired. Alder believed that the races that had been created through breeding with monsters were evil. There might be some good individuals among them, but with modes of life such as that of the vampires, roots of evil would be left behind in the future. They were destroying much of the world's current order. The ways vampires lived, as well as the appearances of Lamias and Scylla, greatly differed from those of the people. Because of this, many of the people believed Alder's words and treated them as targets to be exterminated. However, as Alder had mentioned not long ago, there were some members of Vida's races who had been accepted by society. That was why Kuratos and Eupion, the god of ice, had been declaring that those races were evil in Alder's name, so that they would be destroyed. Destroying a transmigration system would require the use of an ability to destroy the soul like the Demon Kings, or the elimination of the destinations for the reincarnated souls, the killing of every single individual living creature that the souls could reincarnate in. Exceptions could not be made because they were virtuous or because they were a part of society. Now then, how should I handle this? Alder wondered aloud. His thoughts were hectic, but he was truly devoted to his work as a god. He was spreading across the world of Lambda the light attribute that he ruled over and the life attribute that he had stolen from Veda. Normally, Lambda would be operating with the support of the 8 gods of the attributes and 3 other gods, Marduk, Zerno and Gangpaplio. However, as a result of the war against the Demon King and the battle against Veda, Alder was the only one remaining. The Flame and Wind attributes were functioning through the remaining subordinate gods of Zandak and Shazarian sharing their management. However, in order to take away Veda and her subordinate god's divinity and prevent them from being revived, Alder had stolen her authority over the life attribute. Because of this, Alder now had to manage the life attribute that he was not specialized in. His subordinate gods were assisting him with it, but it was not his specialty, so it would not become a significant asset in battle. This would be like requesting the members of a professional football team to produce favorable results as sumo wrestlers without any decrease in skill. Increasing the number of subordinate gods proficient with the life attribute would solve the problem, but those possessing vessels worthy of ascending to godhood did not come by so often, and Alder could not monopolize prodigious individuals for himself. All attributes were suffering, after all. A certain solution would be to have Rodcorti manipulate his system and introduce us souls that are worthy of becoming subordinate gods, said Alder. However, bringing individuals from other worlds to become gods temporarily and having them work for Alder, even if for only a few hundred years, would lessen the burden on Alder and his followers while increasing their strength to fight against the evil gods. But Kuratos shook his head. That god's response would certainly be, "I cannot use my system in an arbitrary manner," said Kuratos. "There is no doubt about that," Alder said in agreement. Though Rodcorti had become quiet as of late, that did not mean that he had become cooperative. Seeking help from him would be futile. "My lord, how about searching for new subordinate gods?" Kuratos suggested. "There are 3 current candidates of at least heroic spirit status." He opened the thick book in his hand and showed Alder the candidates to become subordinate gods in the records within. The reason that they were mere candidates was because there was no telling how their vessels would turn out until the moment their lives ended. No matter how extraordinary they were, those who did not guide the people could not become gods and those who the people did not admire could not become heroic spirits. But lamentable as it was, nameless heroes could not reach the divine realm. 3 was actually a large number of such candidates to exist at a single moment in time. The name of one of them disappeared. "My apologies," said Kuratos. "It appears that one of them has turned to Veda's side." "I see. He has likely either fallen to the temptation of the vampires or stooped low enough to become a demon." Methods of transforming existing people into members of Veda's races were harmful to the real world. The other 2 are Bormak Gordon and Hines, are they? Alder knew of those 2. Gordon was a zealous believer, a little too zealous at times, but he was a devout individual who continued to fight vampires at the front lines. His power as a hero was rather low, but he was top class in the fact that he was a shining exemplar for the people. But the expedition into the Boundary Mountain range that had recently begun was to be his last job. It seemed that he was planning to withdraw from the front lines and focus on guiding the next generation after that. He was simply wishing that during this expedition he would be able to slay the damp that had escaped him before so that he could retire with a clear conscience. At this moment, Alder was still unaware that this damp, Vandali, had been reincarnated in Lambda from another world. He had no method of gaining information about Rodcorti's or Veda's transmigration systems. He had no information other than that given to him through prayer by High Priest Gordon. Though he was a little suspicious about the damp, he was satisfied with the explanation that the damp was a product of the twisted workings of Veda's transmigration system. When Alder and the other gods had summoned champions in the past, Rodcorti had made the unreasonable demand that the champions should be sent back immediately or exploited to their deaths. Considering that, even a god could never have imagined that Rodcorti would have sent humans from another world to this one with no warning, knowing full well that he had prohibited Alder and the other gods from doing so. Alder ran his eyes over the recording data regarding Hines. Hines was another of Alder's followers, an individual who had become an A-class adventurer in less than 10 years. He had more than enough power, but his achievements were a little lacking to be called a hero. Perhaps it was best for Alder to bestow him a divine protection to assist him, but it seemed that he was wavering. Wavering was fine. Both gods and people's thoughts grew deeper through hesitation. A divine protection was merely something to assist the one it was bestowed upon, a reward for the things they had achieved. It could not become something that would bind the believer down. It was likely that Elder would need to carefully observe Heinz, hoping that his hesitation would lead him to the correct answer. But it was also necessary to make preparations in advance. Notify Rod Corti of these two, Elder ordered. For the conversion of a hero into the follower of a god after his death rather than creating a new servant through divine power, it was necessary for Rod Corti to be notified in advance. Even if he was a believer of Elder, it was not Elder who controlled the circle of transmigration, but Rod Corti. If Elder were to try anything too forceful on his own, it would cause defects in the system. As you wish, said Curatos. Also, gather those who are not occupied in this place, including the subordinate gods of the other attributes. I would like to speak to them of what is going to happen from now on. Yes, my lord. Curatos disappeared with a bow. Knowing him, he would soon return after finishing the tasks that Elder had given him. It would be good if a second Bellwood would be born among the people. Elder looked up at the sky of the divine realm and his thoughts turned to the distant past. When Zeruan, the god of space and creation, suggested that champions should be summoned from other worlds in order to defeat the Demon King, Elder had been skeptical. He could not understand why champions who had come from another world like the Demon King would risk their lives and fight for the sake of this world. Was there not a risk that they would betray the gods and turn to the Demon King's side? However, Vida sided with Zeruan, saying that bold actions were needed to deal with the situation that they were faced with. And because the god of reincarnation could not be relied upon for assistance, the opinions of Zeruan and Vida were supported by the others. Zeruan opened a gate to another world and the other 7 gods including Elder each chose and summoned a worthy champion. The one Elder summoned was Suzuki Shuai, who would later become the champion Bellwood. Vida had summoned Seikado Keshyuk, who would later become the fallen champion Zakat. 5 other champions alongside them descended upon Lambda. They were extraordinary saviors. They did have conflicting opinions, but they managed to have discussions that led to better solutions to problems. Bellwood in particular was the ideal champion for Elder. Not only was he strong in battle, but he possessed great courage, fighting against large hordes of monsters on the front lines. Most importantly, he understood Elder's thoughts. Bellwood grieved over Lambda's history, culture and civilization that was lost as a result of the fierce battle against the Demon King, and even regretted that several components of civilizations from other worlds had to be accepted, including the language spoken by the people. Elder-sama, I love this world. This world that is so different from the world I lived in before, this wonderful world. After the Demon King is defeated and peace returns, this world will become far better than the world I came from. These had been Bellwood's words. It was quite possible that conflict was inevitable between the group of Bellwood and Elder and the group of Zakat and Vida who asserted that the knowledge from other worlds should be proactively taken in by this one. Now that I look back on it, that was a mistake. Elder was deep in reminiscence. The ones who had survived the war against the Demon King were himself, Bellwood and 2 other heroes who were in agreement with his opinions, and Vida. But at that point, Vida had already lost her trust in Elder. She likely could not forgive Bellwood for abandoning Zakat during the battle, even if it was a necessary decision to be made to achieve victory. No, it seemed that Vida suspected that Elder and the others had planned things in a way that Zakat would fall. The rift between Elder and Vida grew deeper, and though the Demon King had been torn into pieces and sealed away, the 2 surviving gods fought against each other. I should have given deep thought to Vida's words, acknowledged that there were parts that I could agree upon and given reasons for the parts that I could not. This world's normal state was to have multiple gods existing, even the gods themselves knew this. Elder and Vida in particular were 2 gods with very different senses of values. In the past, Shazarian, Ricalant, Marduk, Ganpaplio and the others would step between them and remonstrate them. Zeruan and Beria would finalize decisions based on everyone's opinions. However, they were all now slumbering or had been destroyed. If trust had been preserved between us, perhaps Vida would not have done reckless things such as creating her own transmigration system and giving birth to new races, thought Elder. But he also thought that he would have only reconsidered which things should be prioritized. He would never have made large changes such as allowing things that he had previously forbidden. Because if he were to make changes to his mistaken doctrine, that would mean that all of his believers who worshipped him had also been mistaken. Most importantly, those who had been victimized up until now would not draw inspiration from such changes. It was also for the sake of those who had been labeled as evil and buried that Elder could not change the definition of what was right. My lord. This is a serious matter. At that moment, Curatos returned. However, his expression had changed. Alder had not seen such a look of dismay on his face since the battle against Vida. Somebody has destroyed the artifact that was a clone of Yupion, the god of ice. What did you say? Alder showed deep unrest upon hearing Kurato's report. Because such a thing would only be possible for someone who possessed the ability to break souls like the Demon King. The Demon King has been resurrected, or perhaps a new Demon King has appeared. Either way, we must first find out who destroyed Yupion's clone, said Alder. Someone possessing the ability to break souls had to be destroyed, no matter who it was. The war could not be allowed to repeat itself. Chapter 53. The horns of war are still distant, but fighting forces must be gathered steadily. On this day, Thomas Palpabek was once again drinking black tea in his personal room with a bitter look on his face. It had been around 2 years since he had resigned from the position of marshal. His daily duties had decreased considerably. As he was an earl who owned no land, his schedules were very free when he wasn't assigned to an important position, allowing him to peacefully enjoy his black tea as he was doing now. What he didn't have was peace of mind. Those damned vampires, Thomas muttered. The vampires of whom he was speaking under his breath in a tone of irritation were the vampires who worshipped the evil god. They were allies. Not to Thomas as an individual, nor to the Migshield nation. Thomas was fully aware that he and the vampires had simply used each other when their interests aligned. However, there was no way that he could not feel angry after being made to do something that was so clearly disadvantageous for him. Around a year ago, a certain movement had occurred in the Amid Empire. An expedition into the Boundary Mountain Range. The Empire was considering ordering the Migshield nation to make such an expedition happen. No, it was already certain that they would make this order. The Empire was giving the Migshield nation a chance to rid themselves of the dishonor of the failed expedition to Talersheim of 200 years ago. It was likely that because the Migshield nation's power as a country had increased more than expected due to Viscount Bauchess's reclamation project, so the Amid Empire was intending to shave a moderate amount of that power off. However, it would normally be impossible for such an expedition to happen even under the orders of the Empire. None of the Empire's vassal nations would obey the command of, all of you, go out and die meaningless deaths. But with the tunnel that had been built 100,000 years ago, large enough for an army to march through, one of the Amid Empire's generals, General Morvid, had presented proof of the existence of such a tunnel and an ancient document that detailed its location. The tunnel had yet to be excavated, but once it was repaired, crossing the Boundary Mountain Range would become simple. An army would be able to reach the other side of the tunnel in a matter of days. They would be able to do so safely, with no fear of monster attacks until they reached the end of the tunnel. With this, the main reason to oppose to the expedition had disappeared. And much to Thomas's dismay, the Migshield nation and its current marshal, Earl Ligston, were eager to make this expedition happen. It was likely that they had received permission to add any land reclaimed inside the Boundary Mountain Range to the nation's territory, and they would likely receive financial assistance for the reclamation process as well. These conditions had likely been offered to them. Those fools. The king of his nation and the nobleman who was an earl like Thomas were truly fools. Thomas could imagine the reasons behind this expedition. The Damp who had led a horde of ghouls across the Boundary Mountain Range and vanished 2 years ago. The vampire who acted as a contact between Thomas and the other vampires, the one who had panicked after learning that the Damp had been allowed to escape. And for some reason, a new contact had come and told Thomas that his predecessor had been entrusted with another mission. A year had passed since then, and the only thing Thomas had heard from the vampires was, it would be wise to stay quiet for now. He hadn't even been able to tell whether this was an order or advice. In other words, the purpose of this expedition was to kill that Damper, and the vampires were planning to use the Migshield nation's army to do so. Without their influence, there was no way that a 100,000-year-old tunnel whose existence hadn't even been confirmed could have been discovered by a general of the Amid Empire who was not even from the Migshield nation adjacent to the tunnel itself. There was no doubt that the vampires would get the Damper involved with the official reason for the expedition. They would use some pretense such as there being a deposit of precious magical metal in the region the Damp was hiding in, or an artifact that was supposed to have been lost in the battle that had taken place 100,000 years ago. If the Damp was living in the ruins of Talersheim, that would be the worst-case scenario. That place was the site of an unforgettable, humiliating victory for the Migshield nation. They had sacrificed enormous amounts of funds, over 10,000 soldiers, a national hero along with his party and an artifact, but only gained a small amount of treasure and a meaningless victory. That was why the Mage Shield Nation had feared the Boundary Mountain Range until now. That place was a demon's gate, a place to be avoided. However, now that it was clear that there was a simple method of crossing the mountain range, there was enthusiasm among the nobles of the Mage Shield Nation for committing a second expedition to Talersheim, recovering the fallen hero's spear that was an artifact of Yapion, the god of ice, and wiping the humiliating victory from history. This was merely what was happening among the nobles. There would be more enthusiastic movements in the nation if its commoners were to learn of the tunnel's existence. I am an Earl of the Mage Shield Nation with connections to the vampires. I had naturally expected that there would be other noblemen within the Amid Empire with connections to the same vampires, but to think that there would be one with the position of general. A general who knew that the expedition would fail, no less. Indeed, the expedition that was going to begin shortly would fail. They would dispose of the damper and everything would go well up to that point. But after that, it would definitely come to a halt. Because the vampires would never allow humans to step foot south of the Boundary Mountain Range. The ones they feared most were the other pure-breed vampires worshipping Vida, who were slumbering in the southern reaches of the continent. It was particularly likely that the officials of the Church of Elder would announce the beginning of a holy war to purge the vampires who worshipped Vida. For generations, the Church's Pope had always been radical about denying Vida. Even if individuals were more moderate before becoming the Pope, once they assumed that position, they would become more extreme. That had always been the case, so it would likely be the case from now on as well. And so the vampires who worshipped the evil gods would stop the expedition. Probably by collapsing the tunnel or making it unusable in some other way. 200 years ago, the tunnel that led to the Orborn Kingdom had been collapsed. Thomas had heard that it would still be unusable even now. It wasn't guaranteed that this had been the work of the vampires, but they would surely be able to do something similar to the other tunnel. The rewards offered to General Morvid would be a large sum of money, or perhaps they have offered to turn him into a vampire. He will obtain immortality, and after that he will use his son, who is rumored to be incapable, as a puppet in order to maintain his public appearance and authority. I suppose the current situation is something like that. Even if the expedition were to fail, by the time it did, he would have used poor health or some other excuse to resign from the position of general, thus no longer being in a position where he would be held responsible. What a carefree position. The Mage Shield Nation would naturally suffer as a result of the expedition, but even the Amid Empire had nothing to gain from it. Morvid would be the only one backing the winning horse, after all. Thomas would have liked to crush the plans of the vampires and General Morvid, but this was impossible for him alone. The moment he made a move, the vampires would likely dispose of him. That was the meaning behind the words that he had been told. It would be wise to stay quiet for now. It would be a different matter if he had his own fighting force and capable spies that he could use to outwit the vampires, but, in reality, if Thomas didn't move, he and the Palpapek House of Earls would come out of this unscathed. He owned no land and thus there were no people under his rule who would be enlisted in the expedition, and since he was no longer a marshal, he would not have to take any responsibility. However, after the pitiful Marshal Legston was forced to retire or hung, he would have to do his utmost to rebuild the strength of his nation that would greatly suffer as a result of the expedition. I have to do whatever I can to reduce the homeland's losses now that I think about it. I have him, don't I? There was a former member of an up-and-coming adventurer party, someone whose personality-related problems prevented him from making use of his excellent ability. He would likely ruin himself one day, getting those around him involved. This was a perfect time to shuffle the cards. Thomas rang a bell that was on his desk, summoning his steward who was also his confidant, to whom he told everything except the vampires. "Was there something you needed done?" asked the steward as he entered the room with a bow. He appeared to have come straight out of a steward's textbook. He was more like a butler than real butlers. "If you are lacking entertainment, I can make arrangements for something right away." "If it is a marriage interview, I would rather not," said Thomas. "Do you intend to have me die during intercourse, old man?" The steward chuckled. "I do pity those who must act as the head of the Palpapek family of earls. It is the duty of a nobleman to take concubines. I believe I already have 3 wives. That is not even a third of the number your predecessor had. You must take at least 2 more," said the steward. "Then please introduce me to an elegant, tidy lady, 70 years of age or older," Thomas requested. "If she has few relatives and looks like she will die within a year, that is even better. Thomas-sama, you must moderate your liking for women who are older than myself. I merely want to avoid leaving any roots of evil for the next generation." Thomas changed the subject. "The conversation about marriage interviews ends here, old man. I want to talk about Riley. Is it possible to indirectly place him at Marshal Legston's side? Though surprise appeared on the face of the steward, whose expression was hidden among his wrinkles and beard, his eyebrows did not even twitch. The Greenwind Spear, Riley don't know. It is likely possible, but is this fine with you? He asked. My lord, he is the B-class adventurer that you spent much effort in drawing to your own side to replace the blue-flamed sword, Hines. No matter how inferior he is to Hines, placing him with Marshal Legston, and if you make him approach on his own with no letter of introduction, the Marshal will not owe you any favors. To the steward's knowledge, Riley had clearly inferior qualities. There was nothing dissatisfactory about his ability, his strength in battle. He possessed strength worthy of his class, and he had talent. Enough talent that he could become at least A-class if he improved himself. What was actually inferior was almost everything other than his strength in battle. He was inferior as an adventurer, as a nobleman's vassal, as a person. His personality was a particularly poor quality of his character. At first, it had been thought that he was simply ambitious to achieve things, but he had a strong complex and craving for fame, and lately he had been displaying elitist behavior, as if he were under the impression that he was a chosen hero. Learning from the examples of heroes in the past, he had bought slaves, trained them into adventurers, and gained a sense of self-satisfaction in doing so he was almost beyond saving. He was a poor product that would fail in the distant future, disguised as a high-quality one. Thomas had already been deceived, but this was the perfect time to send him out and be rid of him. I do not mind, said Thomas. In fact, if I write a letter of introduction, it will be my reputation that is damaged when he makes a mess of something. Make Legston think that this is the second coming of the tragic hero Mikhail or something. Fortunately, Riley wields a spear, so he will be popular among the citizens. Ah, and do not forget to have the Adventurers Guild make him A-class. Certainly. He would be satisfied with becoming a hero as well. I will first order the Guild Master of the Adventurers Guild to promote him to A-class, and then I will send indirect whispers to him that staying by your side will hurt his chances of becoming a hero, my lord. The steward left the room with a bow. The work he would be doing from now, sending whispers, was clearly not a simple task, but the reason he was serving as the steward for a house of earls was because he was able to do such work. If he hadn't already been marked by the vampires, he would have had a little more freedom to move, however. I suppose there is no use giving this any more thought, Thomas told himself. If this causes Riley to serve beneath Legston, the strength of the force that I can mobilize will likely decrease considerably. If a great hero took part in the expedition, less other men would be needed. It would be most satisfactory if this move would prevent at least 100 or 200 more soldiers from joining the expedition. Fortunately, our army tends not to allow the participation of adventurers in military expeditions that do not involve the hunting of monsters. Even in the worst-case scenario, we will not suffer an increase in the frequency of monster rampages due to a fall in adventurer numbers. Now all Thomas had to do was pray that Riley would be accepted by Legston. Don't disappoint me. The day after Vandalay had told Darcy that he couldn't repair the resurrection device yet, he headed towards the ruins of the Adventurers Guild for his third job change. The trading area was busy as usual, so much so that there was apparently a shortage of fish sauce. Taylorsheim's fishing industry was dependent on Duran's aquatic caverns. The fishermen would walk into the dungeon, cast their nets, thrust their spears into the water, throw their fishing lines out, and then bring the fish home. However, the amount of fish they could bring back this way was smaller than if they could simply pile the fish onto a boat to bring them back. Apparently this was why supply of the small fish used as ingredients for fish sauce couldn't keep up with the demand. Even Vandalay couldn't make fish sauce without using small fish. Couldn't they catch small fish in the waterways? Vandalay wondered. We've hunted all of the flying sharks living in them, so it should be easier to fish than in Duran's aquatic caverns. Yeah, that's true, but the fishermen don't really want to do it. They say that there's not enough excitement, the undead Titan receptionist explained. She had been made of bones and rotting flesh, but Vandalay had used freshness restoration to return her to the state she had been in when she was killed. As expected of a fighting race. It seemed that the battles that occurred during fishing were exciting events for the fishermen. If it weren't for the Kachabushi and kombu, there would have been a major shortage of fish sauce, said the receptionist. In my opinion, the solution for this problem is the development of a new product. Her one remaining eye glistened with expectation. Indeed, if a new product was developed and demand was divided between it and fish sauce, a shortage of fish sauce could be avoided even if it supplely stayed as it was now. But the one who has to make that new product is me, isn't it? Said Vandalay. The amount of products I make each month has decreased, though. Do your best, please work on replacing my other eye quickly too. Okay. It would be nice if I could get along well with the receptionists of real adventurers guilds later as well, thought Vandali as he headed into the job-changing room. Undead Tamer Soulbreaker Venom Fist User and Zek User Archenemy. What is Archenemy? There was a new job there. What was this Archenemy job? Was it supposed to be read as techie? Did that mean that he would be something like Satan? Satan, not Santa. It was probably related to the destruction of the Dragon Golem and the breaking of Ice Age's soul. Archenemy, it would probably grant a bonus to the Godslayer skill. But it wasn't the kind of job he wanted being recorded in an adventurer's guild. Let's take that one later, Vandali decided. He picked the Undead Tamer job this time. With this, Balkus and Bone Man would likely be strengthened even more. You have acquired the strengthened subordinate skill. Name, Vandali. Race, Damper. Dark Elf. Age, 5 years old. Title: Ghoul King. Job, Undead Tamer. Level 0. Job history: Death attribute Mage, Golem transmuter attributes: Vitality, 115 mana, 224,557,626 strength, 80 agility, 81 stamina, 87 intelligence, 407 passive skills: Superhuman strength, level 1 rapid healing, level 3 death attribute magic, level 5 status effect resistance, level 5 magic resistance, level 1 dark vision mental corruption, level 10 death attribute charm, level 5 chant revocation, level 3 strengthen followers, level 7 automatic mana recovery, level 3 strengthen subordinates, level 3 new active skills: blood sucking, level 3 surpass limits, level 4 golem transmutation, level 6 no attribute magic, level 4 mana control, level 4 spirit form, level 3 carpentry, level 4 engineering, level 3 cooking, level 2 alchemy, level 3 unarmed fighting technique, level 2 soul break, level 2 multicast, level 2 long distance control, level 2 unique skills: Godslayer, level 1 curses, experience gained in previous life not carried over, cannot learn existing jobs, unable to gain experience independently. The moment Vandali's job changed, he acquired the strengthen subordinates skill. This was the human version of the strengthen followers skill, a lower equivalent. It strengthened familiars, beasts, spirits, livestock and golem accompanying the user, and the amount they were strengthened was about the same as the strengthen followers skill. It was mainly used by alchemists, spirit users and shepherds. But as the skill could level up without increasing the number of subordinates, it was simpler to acquire than the strengthen followers skill. In my case, my followers will have double strengthening from both strengthen followers and strengthen subordinates. Vandali chuckled to himself at the fact that this was such an easy, certain and effective method of improving everyone's strength. Incidentally, after this, Vandali dug up the buried statue of Yapion and repeatedly destroyed it and rebuilt it in order to examine his Godslayer skill, but nothing happened. It seemed that he would need to take on a god-made artifact or a god's subordinate in order to discover its effect. He got the feeling that the dirt around the statue had turned a little red, but nothing about the statue had changed. A few days after his job change, Vandali went into the underground chamber beneath the royal castle once more. This time, he was here to recover the wreckage of the Dragon Golem. Though it was wreckage, it was still orichalcum. With his current level of golem transmutation, he was able to change its shape and preserve it. However, he knew that he could not genuinely manipulate it as he wanted to. If I could beat orichalcum to turn it into weapons, I would be a god right now instead of an undead, said Datara. Orichalcum was a wondrous material for a blacksmith, and yet it was impossible to manipulate. It could not be melted even by magma. No file could shave its surface off, and even if it bent after being struck, it would soon return to its original shape. Because of this, not even a first-rate blacksmith could turn it into weapons or armor. It was said that any blacksmith capable of doing so would likely be praised as a divine craftsman. But it's possible to use it in various ways, isn't it? Said Vandali. Like turning it into flat pieces and using them as a shields, or turning it into lumps to use in maces and hammers, or using them as ammo for the catapults. Shields boasting the greatest physical and magical defense of any shield in the world, and blunt weapons capable of tearing through any barrier like paper. Leaving aside the joke of using the orichalcum as ammunition for the catapults, it should be very useful. Ice Age, which was now just an orichalcum spear, so Sam was holding on to it for now. It would probably make a good lance. As Vandali was splitting the golem's wreckage into pieces small enough to fit through the entrance to the audience chamber, he found something interesting in the corner of Dragon Golem's chamber. As he moved aside the broken pieces of the Dragon Golem's wing that Mikhail had destroyed, he found dead bodies covered in cursed ice, probably around 5 of them. These corpses, whose are they? Vandali wondered. Though they hadn't decomposed as they had been covered in ice like Zandia's severed hand, they had been horrendously damaged. There was not a single corpse left intact. But they were probably not titans. And they probably weren't vampires, either. Come to think of it, Mikhail had a party, didn't he? Borkus hadn't mentioned them, nor had Vandali seen them in Zandia's residual memories. In the stories told in Talishheim and in the Mage Shield Nation, they were simply mentioned as Mikhail's companions. Vandali hadn't known their names or how many of them there were, so they hadn't made much of an impression of him. But now that he thought about it, Mikhail did indeed have a party. With that being the case, this was a tomb created by Ice Age. Perhaps because he could not bear to leave the corpses of his master's companions, he had covered them in cursed ice and buried them with small fragments of the golem in a crater that had been made during the battle. There was no tombstone, but it was a more extravagant grave than the ones dead royalty and nobles lay in. Considering the price of orichalcum, it was no doubt equivalent to being buried in one of the pyramids on Earth. Vandali removed all of the orichalcum and inspected the bodies one by one. One of them was an enormous man, almost the size of a titan. There was a crushed shield next to him, so he was likely a shield bearer. But as his body had been turned into mince from the neck down, he was very grotesque. The second was a dwarf, perhaps? There was no corpse, only shredded lengths of braided hair. No, those were probably only his beard, and the scraps of metal were likely his armor. There were some pieces bearing the holy mark of Elder, so was he a zealous believer or some priest warrior? The third was a female witch. She was wearing a robe and holding a staff, so there was no doubt about that. But it was uncertain as whether she was a human or an elf. The lower jaw was the only remaining part of her head, so it was impossible to see the shape of her ears. Vandali did think that she was a human, however. The fourth was a dark-skinned woman wearing armor made of leather taken from a monster. Her head was intact, but the rest of her body was in pieces, like a disturbing jigsaw puzzle. She had probably been cut by the dragon golem's wings. The fifth was on close inspection, not a person. Isn't this an ogre? It was the corpse of a demi-humanoid monster, an ogre. It was wearing armor and holding a weapon, so it appeared to be a large warrior, but the horn that initially looked like an ornament on its helmet were actually growing out of its forehead. Incidentally, they were often confused for Magians, which were one of the races created by Veda, but they were different. Ogres only had one horn while Magians had two. It seemed that this ogre was a tamed familiar of one of the other four. But there were multiple gaping, fist-sized holes in its body, only its heads and limbs were unharmed. Mikhail, these four and the ogre had challenged the dragon golem, and only Mikhail had managed to return to the ground's surface after suffering a fatal wound. His encounter with the vampires that followed shortly after that had spelled the end of the entire party. These four had not even left their names behind. Even if Andali were to try to listen to their spirits, they had probably likely already returned to the circle of transmigration. With the corpses of these heroes before him, Vandali didn't even offer them any prayer as he contemplated. What kind of undead should I create using these? He wondered out loud. He had no feelings of grief over the corpses of his enemies. He would have been more reserved if they were titan bodies, but as they were the dead bodies of those from the Mage Shield Nation, they were nothing more than materials to him. This was no different from stripping the meat off the bodies of orcs and taking the bones and skin of dragons. If he had felt aversion to doing things like this, he would never have created Bone Man to begin with. First, I'll give this big eyeball to the receptionist San, but the rest of them are too damaged to make them undead just as they are. I suppose I'll take them apart and then join them back together. This would also be good practice for creating Dasa's body. But I'll do that after the orichalcum is all carried outside. After he put the corpses together, he would need to think about the spirits he put in them. It would likely be fine as he had the death attribute charm skill, but it would certainly be problematic if the undead were to turn on him like Frankenstein's monster. Name, Vigoro rank, 7 race, Ghoul Tyrant level, 7 job, Axe Master job level, 0 job history, Apprentice Warrior, Axeman age, 171 years old. Passive skills, Night Vision Superhuman Strength, level 5, level up. Pain Resistance, level 4 Paralyzing Venom Secretion, Claws, level 3, level up. Strengthened attribute values when equipped with an axe, medium, new. Active skills, Axe Technique, level 7, level up. Hand-to-hand fighting technique, level 2 commanding, level 4, level up. Coordination, level 2 deforestation, level 2, new. Dismantling, level 1, new. Monster explanation, Ghoul Tyrant, the highest rank form of ghoul that has ever been witnessed. They possess bodies as large as titans and 4 arms, and it is said that their lions' heads are fearsome enough that even the true kings of beasts would tremble before them. As they usually rule groups of hundreds of ghouls, they almost always possess the strength and followers' skill. A ghoul tyrant has not been seen in the past 1,000 years, leading some scholars to believe that they are not a high-rank version of ghoul at all, but mutated individuals who are born that way. Job explanation, Axe Master, a job that can only be acquired after an individual reaches level 100 with the Axeman job and possesses a level 6 or greater skill in axe technique. The strengthened attribute values when equipped with an axe skill is a perfect example of the skills specialized for the wielding of axes that can be gained with this job. This job is essentially proof that those who have acquired the job are first-rate fighters when wielding axes. They can easily become servants of noblemen or open their own axe technique dojo. Adventurers possessing this job are usually B-class. Chapter 54, They approach as I'm playfully bitten and creating forests. So I've made a new undead, Vandally announced. Congratulations! Saria exclaimed. It is the first time you have made an undead that other than insects and dinosaurs since you created us, isn't it? Wah, I'm happy that we are going to get a Kuhai, said Rita. Bone Chimera gave a cry for attention. Notchen, you were transformed rather than created, so you're a little different, aren't you? Said Saria. Incidentally, Bone Chimera's name was Notchen, which means bone in German. In any case, this is an auspicious event, said Sam. The new person was quietly unveiled before Saria and the others. Vandally had decided to create undead from the corpses of Mikhail's companions. He thought that even without the original spirits of the bodies, he could make undead who would be powerful right from the beginning if he used the bodies of a hero's companions and a large amount of mana as the materials. First, Vandally used the female mage's corpse that was the least damaged as a base. He would use brown-skinned female warrior's head to replace the missing head. Fortunately, they weren't too different in size. He cut off the lower jaw that was remaining on the mage, making sure to get the cutting angle right, and then attached the head of the female warrior. However, below the female mage's neck, certain hard-to-see parts of her body had broken bones and torn muscles. Organ damage to some extent wouldn't cause any problems if Vandally was turning her into a zombie, but since the state of the stomach would affect the zombie's experience gain, he wanted to have everything in a clean state if possible. Vandally had heard on Earth that focusing on the interior was the secret to creating a good product. However, the female warrior's body had been torn to pieces. There were no parts of her body apart from her head that were intact. This also went without saying for the other corpses. Thus, Vandally decided to go to the ruins of the Adventurers Guild to get a supply of monster organs. He used Golem transmutation to change the shapes of sturdy drawn horns to use as bones, replaced the liver and kidneys with those of a hydra and replaced the lungs with the resized lungs of a plesiosaur, a creature that appeared occasionally in Duran's aquatic caverns. And because he wanted a companion with the ability to fly, he attached the wings of a pterosaur to the mage's back. This proved to be very difficult. He had to conduct a major surgery in which he altered the shape of the mage's shoulder blades and created the musculature needed to move the wings from muscle fibers and tendons he had taken from the ogre. Also, he decided to have a tail growing from the tailbone. To that tail, he attached the stinger and venom gland of a cemetery bee that had died of old age, and added the venom glands of a venom wyvern, a hydra and a shark-eating anemone so that it would be able to choose which venom it would inject its victim with. And then he replaced the arms from the elbow down and legs from the knees down with parts from the ogre. Wouldn't this result in greater strength? As the female mage lacked the muscles to support this body, he took the necessary muscles from the female warrior and the ogre while replacing the parts of her skin that had been burned with the female warrior's. Finally, he inserted the magic stones of monsters into her body. And so this what I built as a result, said Vandally. There was a faint, groaning sound. The female zombie, who Vandally had named Rapisage, emerged from below a cover. The name meant patching to Vandaly's knowledge. It was a word that had been used in origin, so the actual fine meaning might be a little different. She had the beautiful face of a girl of an age in between being a child and an adult, combined with the mature, well-trained body of a warrior with feminine curves. But the limbs below the elbows and knees were those of an ogre, powerful enough to easily crush a person's skull. Membranous wings sprouted from her back, and a serpent-like tail with the stinger of a bee extended from her hips. Her skin was a mixture of pale skin, brown skin and the dark green skin of an ogre joined together by stitches, giving her a strange beauty that could be called the beauty of the afterlife. At first glance, she appeared to be a beautiful and yet strange, unidentifiable zombie. And her status was as follows: name, Rapeseage rank, 4 race, patchwork zombie level, 0 passive skills, dark vision rapid regeneration, level 5 deadly poison secretion, tail, level 5 physical resistance, level 3 magic resistance, level 3 superhuman strength, level 1 active skills, electrify, level 2 high speed flight, level 1. Her specs were quite high. She had great regenerative abilities because Vandali had given her the organs of a hydra, and she was capable of switching between paralyzing venom, neurotoxic venom or hemorrhage-inducing venom. And perhaps because the female mage or the female warrior had possessed them, or perhaps for some other unknown reason, she possessed resistance against both physical and magical attacks. She had also inherited the ogre's superhuman strength at level 1. The unexpected thing was that she possessed Electrify, a skill likely possessed by Trons. She had probably acquired the skill because Vandali had used their horns in her bones. Touching her carelessly would result in a numbing shock. Because Vandali had used parts of the ogre's limbs, the female mage who was the base of the zombie had become slightly taller than before and appeared to have poor balance, but overall, Vandali's craftsmanship wasn't bad. She's quite muscular, as would be expected, Saria observed. She is also quite voluptuous. If I made her thin, she wouldn't be able to control her movements, would she? Said Vandali. And anyway, muscles are power. I'm sure Gibberman would feel bitter about this. After all, even if they were nameless, you have stolen the corpses of a hero's companions from him, Botjan! Exclaimed Rita. It is indeed quite pleasant to imagine what kind of expression he would have, Vandali said in agreement. Though I've never seen Gibberman's face before, he admitted. She was rank 4 to begin with, ready to fight, and she was versatile. Though she would need to train as she did not possess any martial-type skills, the experiment had been a huge success. On top of that, she could even inflict emotional damage upon Vandali's future enemy. She is wonderful, Vandali-sama, said Eleonora, her eyes moist with emotion. Not only can you combine multiple corpses, you can even draw out their original functions. You are already capable of doing the same things as Gibberman and Tanisha. I see. I'm still only able to do the same things as them, as to be expected of beings who had lived for 100,000 years. It seemed that they were still a step ahead even when it came to the creation of undead. They likely knew methods and secrets that were still unknown to Vandali. Vandali didn't know when he would face them, but he decided to make sure to ask them before breaking their souls. Rapeseage let out a groan, and then a biting noise. You bastard! Don't eat Vandali-sama! Shouted Eleonora. Rita laughed. Rapeseage is being spoiled by Botjan. It seems to be a playful bite, said Sam. It kinda feels a bit painful for a playful bite, Vandali began to say, but then Notchen made a noise. Wait, Notchen, stop it. As if provoked by the way Rapeseage was munching on Vandali's arm, Notchen began pressing its monkey and wolf heads against him as well. These events made Vandali decide not to make any plans to produce zombies in large numbers in the near future. He knew that he wasn't quite in the predicament that Dr. Frankenstein was in, but having large numbers of zombies biting him playfully would be painful indeed. You have acquired the surgery skill. Vandali made Rapeseage train its unarmed fighting technique in battle while he distributed orichalcum equipment to everyone else. And in order to become more experienced with golem transmutation as well as to be better prepared against the vampires, he began repairing the city's defense installations. The Mage Shield Nation had been sloppy when it came to destroying them, and the installations themselves hadn't degraded over the past 200 years. So fortunately, Vandali was able to repair them using golem transmutation. The vampires would never dream that they would have been repaired, so they were certain to become an ace up his sleeve. Meanwhile, numerous dragons were fought. Borkus engaged in multiple fierce battles against storm dragons, Vigoro fought fiery battles against burst ogres that were mutant ogres emitting flames from all over their bodies, and Zadiris fought battles of magic against great treants, tree-type monsters that could cast spells. These were very profitable in terms of both materials and experience points. Storm dragon sashimi went well with wasabi, burst ogre hides could be used in heat-resistant armor and great treant lumber could be turned into good staves. The greatest find of all was the discovery of wild garlic. As it was wild garlic, The smell was harsher than cultivated garlic, so Vandali decided to use death attribute magic to apply selective breeding to it. I suppose I'll have to make items that can remove bad breath. I have a feeling it would be easier to make magic items with the deodorization spell than to produce mint goods, said Vandali. You're going to make magic items just to remove bad breath? Asked Bazir. Isn't that pretty luxurious? Asked Borkus. Botchan, even noblemen don't have magic items like that, you know? Said Saria. It's a luxury, is it? Right, I'll definitely make it then, Vandali decided. And so he began his work to cultivate garlic and produce magic items to remove bad breath. By the time the season could truly be called summer, there had been numerous developments. First, the cultivation of garlic was going incredibly well. With the soil of Taylorsheim that was a semi-devil's nest and Minya that Vandali had created with fermentation, the garlic was growing with incredible vigor. The garlic could be harvested as often as once a week. As a result of selective breeding, garlic the same size as the garlic used on Earth with less of a smell had been produced. But the nutritional value and the main components probably wouldn't change, or so Vandali thought. That was what he felt after examining it with magic, but since he didn't have proper equipment for examining it, he couldn't say for sure that this was the case. Garlic was added as another flavoring commodity at the ruins of the Adventurers Guild, and the demand for fish sauce decreased ever so slightly. Vandali had also successfully created magic items to remove bad breath. They were large and barrel-shaped. Water stored in them would turn into gargling water that possessed the effects of deodorization and sterilization. These were placed in the city's plazas, every bathhouse and all the main buildings. The people would take water from these barrels to wash their hands and rinse their mouths after eating. Braga's rank increased and he became a black goblin ninja. After hearing about ninjas from Vandali, Braga had used those stories as a basis for his training and pestered the blacksmith Datara to make him shurikens, kunais and curved swords resembling ninjas' katanas. After he leveled up and some time had passed, he had become a magnificent monster bearing the title of ninja. Even Vandali was surprised by this. He hadn't expected Braga to become Lambda's first ninja after listening to his stories that almost certainly contained fictional elements. This was likely the result of the Black Goblin's incredible physical abilities and, more importantly, their characteristically quick development. King, I can fly like this. Nin nin. Braga looked to be enjoying himself as he hopped around, each of his jumps being over 5 meters high. Would he be the first in the world to acquire the ninjutsu skill, summon giant toads or transform into things like special effects in movies? After talking to him, Vandali got the feeling that he'd be able to do any of them. I can't lose either. For some reason, Zran, the undead titan who was Braga's scout instructor, was getting fired up as well. He was training to become a ninja as well, so it was possible that the birth of Lambda's second ninja was close. One day, the Anubis Zemado and the ghouls led Vandali to a corner of the city where a tree was growing, bearing blue fruits the size of babies' heads. He had seen this fruit numerous times in the Devil's Nest forest. King, there's a cobalt tree growing here, said Zemado. Even in devil's nests, cobalt trees normally only grew where kobolds lived. But there was a cobalt tree growing here. These blue things are cobalt fruits, huh? It's my first time seeing them, said Memadiga. Can you really eat them? Asked Zemado. They're really blue. There were no kobolds nearby, so the two of them were seeing cobalt fruits for the first time and were bewildered by their color. However, the reason cobalt trees were growing was clearly because the Anubises were present. As there wasn't a single kobold in the city, there was no other explanation. Vandali hadn't thought that Anubises could cause cobalt trees to grow. Thinking about it another way, the reason the cobalt trees haven't grown up until now has been there weren't many Anubises considering their city's size, or maybe just by chance, said Vandali. Or maybe a cobalt seed from a fruit eaten by someone who ventured far away dropped here by chance. Well, there's no use in thinking about it too much, he concluded. What was certain was that cobalt trees that didn't grow outside of devil's nests were growing in Taylorsheim, and that their fruit could be eaten. But it's still small, King, said Zemado. Indeed it is, said Vandali. The cobalt tree was still only 1.5 meters tall, and it hadn't even produced 10 fruits yet. There weren't enough. Let's try supplying it with mana for now, Vandali decided. In devil's nests, even normal plant life grew faster than usual, not just monsters. This was due to the mana contaminating the soil. With that being the case, would the growth of the cobalt trees be accelerated if Vandali deliberately provided more mana to the soil? With this idea in mind, Vandali discharged a large amount of mana into the soil around the tree and, while he was at it, he also applied the fertilizer he had created with fermentation. The next day, the cobalt tree was over 3 meters tall and there were dozens of fruit growing on it. Not only that, but there were more cobalt trees growing around it. Getting carried away by this success, Vandali decided to cultivate trees of other fruits in different places. The space between the first and second outer walls didn't have a single building yet, so he planted seeds for various fruits including acorns and walnuts to begin his experiment here. He used out-of-body experience to branch his arms out like tentacles, combined with his physical body and used mana transfer on the ground. Holding nothing back, he poured mana into the soil starting in the morning, straight through the afternoon all the way into the evening. He had recovered some mana in between, so he had ended up pouring perhaps about 300 million mana into the ground. This was because the number of spells he could cast at once had increased due to the long-distance control and multicast skills. However, the next day, nothing had changed. Thinking that mana alone didn't work, he applied his handmade fertilizer and then poured his mana into the ground. If this goes well, we can eat all kinds of fruits every day. When I go to the Orborn Kingdom, I can bring back rare fruits and seeds. Talersheim will become a kingdom of fruits. Foo-fa-fa-foo. With these ambitions rising up within him, Vandali poured 300 million mana into the ground today as well. And the next day, Vandali headed to the site of his experiment expecting trees to have grown, only to find that they had grown beyond his expectations. "Wow, I've done something incredible, if I do say so myself," he remarked. Vandali made sure there was no poison in the fruits just in case, then headed straight back to the city to report the results of his experiment. "Oh, how wonderful!" exclaimed New Arza. "Holy Sun, you have recreated the legends of Vida, who was said to have transformed the barren wastelands into lush forests for the sake of the people. This is a miracle. Truly divine work." No, it's not a miracle or divine work. I'm a person, after all," said Vandali. "But it really is amazing," Darsa told him. "I'm sure you'd be able to turn even deserts into forests, Vandali." "Mom, it took me 2 days to create a single thicket," Vandali reminded her. "That's plenty fast enough. Forests normally take hundreds or thousands of years to form, after all." Not everyone had gone mad with excitement and religious fanaticism like New Arza, but everyone did give Vandali moderate praise, putting him in a good mood. "What is this flower used for?" asked Bazdier. "It is a defeat flower," replied Zadyrus. "If I recall, the boy said oil can be taken from this tree's seeds. This flower was similar to camellias, and until now, there hadn't been large amounts of this flower available. It had been named the defeat flower because when the flower fell from the tree, it resembled the severed head of a general who had been defeated in battle falling to the ground. The tree provided them with oil. The fruit that formed after the flowers fell could be steamed and squeezed to produce oil that could be used as fuel or food. There wasn't much demand for lighting in Talersheim as its inhabitants possessed the night vision skill that allowed them to read just fine with just the moonlight, or the dark vision skill that let them see in complete darkness as if it were the middle of the afternoon. But Vandali had actually wanted oil to use in food. "With this, I can make tempura and swage, and also mayonnaise." It was possible to take oil from acorns, but the demand for acorn powder had been greater, and taking lard from orcs and other monsters took more time and effort than extracting it from plants. So now he could make foods and flavorings that he had been unable to make before. "Botchan, isn't that tree moving?" asked Trita. "Eh? No way, there's no way a tree would move, right?" said Vandali, coming back from his delicious fantasies that had spread its wings to look at the tree that she was pointing at. But a moment later, he was perplexed. "Huh? Was there a tree in that spot when we first came here?" Right before Vandali's eyes, the tree's roots moved like legs to produce a sluggish motion. "It did move, didn't it?" he said. "It does seem like it moved," said Zadyrus in agreement. "See, I told you it moved, didn't I?" exclaimed Rita. "It looks like an inn. Where did it sneak in from?" asked Zadyrus. "Well, if it's just one tree coming at me, I'll turn it into lumber right away." Thinking that it would be best to fell the tree just in case, Vigoro, who was now a battle lumberjack, raised his trusty axe. As he did, the entire thicket squirmed with the loud rustling of leaves. "Did all the trees we can see just move?" asked Trita. "Could it be that all of the trees in this thicket are Ents?" Kuka guessed. Her guess was entirely correct. Ents are rank 3 plant-type monsters. They use their roots as legs to move and possess faces resembling those of humans on their trunks. Their strength is proportional to the size of their bodies, and their trunks are as hard as iron. As they are made of wood, they may look weak to fire, but they possess the fire element resistance skill, so they are difficult to burn. However, their movements are dull and they are only able to swing their branches and roots around in battle. Because of their folktale-like appearance and their human-like faces, they are imagined to be intelligent, but their intelligence is not significantly different from that of goblins. However, as they possess the characteristics of plants, they do not attack other creatures except in self-defense or if they are in extremely dry, barren land. Even in devil's nests, as long as they are not carelessly approached and no fires are lit nearby, they are relatively unthreatening, rare monsters. Their fresh leaves can be used to make poultices, and their trunks can be used as high-quality wood. Their faces are used as proof of their extermination. Incidentally, the cause of their appearance has long been a source of puzzlement for researchers. The leading theory is that there are seeds that grow into large trees and form mints. However, the existence of such seeds is still yet to be proven. Another theory is that normal trees become mints when polluted with mana. Renowned mages have tried pouring mana into soil in experiments to test this theory, but in the end, no trees transformed into mints in these experiments. So, Van, how much mana did you pour into them? Asked Bazdier. If I recall, I recovered my mana as I worked, so it was around 300 million mana yesterday, replied Vandali. Your mana is amazing as always, isn't it, Van? Upon hearing the mention of mana in the hundreds of millions, Kaka, who was more open with her feelings these days, let out a sigh. She had been training in magic recently, but her mana was just over 100. In a single day, the 5-year-old boy in front of her had poured 3 million times that amount into the ground. Wasn't it simply too extraordinary? I wish you'd share some of that mana with me, she said. Well, you do share it with me from time to time, she added. Indeed, said Zadaris in agreement. No matter how renowned a mage is, they would not possess 100 million. It seemed that as a result of an incredible amount of Vandal's mana being continuously poured into the ground, all of the previously very ordinary seeds had grown into ints. This made the truth behind the appearance of ints very clear. It did seem like it would be years before this was announced to human society, however. By the way, is it alright with the plants like this? Vandali wondered. You walked around before you brought us here, didn't you? Said Vigoro. Isn't it fine, then? It does not seem that they will attack us when we come near, said Sam. Holy Sun, how is your death attribute charm? Asked New Arza. It seems to be working. Why was death attribute charm having an effect on plant type ints who didn't have death or cemetery in their names? It was unclear, but there was no denying that it was affecting them. But appraisal revealed, rank, 4, name, immortal treant, summary, mutant treants who have been showered in death attribute mana as seeds. However, they do not possess evil natures. They are resistant to all kinds of conditions, physical attacks and magical attacks, and they possess excellent self-restoring abilities. In other words, they were ints that were incredibly difficult to kill. Well, I suppose we have more fighting forces and an additional source of food, said Vandali. For now, he needed to refine the defeat flower oil. He decided to make alums and establish a production system right away. A group of 7 people proceeded through a large, dark corridor. The group of men and women holding lanterns to light the way, wearing various kinds of equipment, looked like adventurers in the middle of clearing a dungeon ruins. This would be half correct. There's less resistance than I expected, for great ruins that were supposedly sealed off 100,000 years ago, said a man in his late 20s wielding a spear as he stabbed a demon to death. Demons are coagulations of contaminated mana with evil wills that turn into monsters. The lesser demon with the head and legs of a black goat that the man just defeated was the weakest kind, but even that was a powerful rank 6 enemy. However, it's nothing but small fry, this doesn't even make for good exercise. You are absolutely right, Riley Aniki, said a small man in light equipment who appeared to be a scout. The unamused face of the green-winged spear Riley twisted in a small smile. There is no helping it, there is no way that a suitable opponent for someone like you who is an A-class adventurer with a title would be easily to find, said a woman whose cleavage was visible through her revealing top, who would appear to be a prostitute rather than a mage if she were not holding a staff. Riley's smile grew wider. Do you think so as well, Flark? Riley asked. There was no response. Come to think of it, your collar is set so that you can't talk, isn't it? Well, whatever. The man called Flark was a shield-bearer wearing plate armor and a helmet made of black steel harder and heavier than iron, holding a shield larger than the smaller man. As Riley spoke to him, he didn't even so much as glance at Riley. But Riley showed no signs of concern as he chuckled and continued. "Well, I suppose there's no helping it," said Riley. "I'm not foolish enough to think that heroes who leave their names in history are constantly doing flashy work. They have to do this kind of dull work as well. Especially when it's requested by Earl Morvid. The words of a hero are really something else," said the small man in admiration. "Kaya, how wonderful!" squealed the female mage. Flark said nothing, letting out only a small, short sigh. The other two praised Riley and flattered him even more unabashedly than before. This conversation alone would be enough to indicate that the adventurers of this party were not all of equal standing, but the collars worn by Flark and the others made it very clear. The three of them were wearing hard, black collars on their necks. They were slaves owned by Riley. The marks engraved on the collars showed that they were criminal slaves. Unlike slaves of debt who would be released and return to becoming normal people once their debts were paid off, criminal slaves could be legally treated in any manner and they wouldn't be released until their deaths. There was no way that these were companions of equal status. Riley held their lives and possessions in his hands. With a party formed with just these slaves, it was not unnatural for Riley to become carried away. However, there were three more people other than Riley and his slaves. They were three individuals with pale skin and crimson eyes, giving wry smiles at the conversation they were hearing. "Do you guys think so as well?" Riley asked them. One of the red-eyed individuals smiled even wider as he answered. "We are grateful that we were able to make this exchange, Riley Dono." There were fangs visibly protruding from his mouth. Chapter 55. Sometime after autumn, insects will be drawn to the light. Other than his talent, the Greenwind Spear, Riley was a normal adventurer that could be found anywhere. He came from a commoner background, and he had become an adventurer because he had confidence in his own skill. His objective had been to earn gold. And though he never said this out loud, he held the hopes and dreams of becoming like the protagonists of the heroic tales he had heard as a child. When Riley was still a novice, he happened to witness Heinz registering as an adventurer. He got on well with this younger man and decided to form a party with him. And then a female dwarf shield-bearer, an intellectual young male scout who wielded a bow and a beautiful elf woman who used spiritual magic were added to the party and they became known as the Five-Colored Blades. Just like in folk songs about heroes, the four members other than Riley had abundant talent as well. After a hard year of completing goblin extermination requests, they were comparable to veteran D-class adventurers. In the next year, they were promoted to class, a little superior to average adventurers. In their third year together, they cleared a previously undiscovered dungeon, acquiring valuable magic items and fame, and Heinz, the party leader, was promoted to B-class. He was bestowed with a title, the Blue Flamed Sword, originating from the magic sword he acquired from the dungeon. Around that time, before he knew it, Riley found that he held dark feelings towards Heinz. Riley had talent himself, he was just as handsome and strong as Heinz. Though Heinz was the party leader, Riley wondered, why was he being treated as a bonus addition to Heinz? Heinz was the only one to be promoted to B-class after clearing the dungeon. Riley had acquired a mithril spear with an emerald green jewel that controlled the wind, but he hadn't gained a title. Noblemen and merchants were frantic to form connections with Heinz, the individual with such talent that he had become a B-class adventurer in his teenage years. There were numerous talks of officer and specialist contracts and, best of all, he was approached by good women. Even the receptionist at the Adventurers Guild looked at him with moist eyes. In contrast to that, Riley was only known as one of Heinz's companions. It was as if there was a sign with those exact words hanging around his neck. And then Riley came to the realization that it was not him, but Heinz who had become the protagonist of the heroic folk songs. It was the greatest failure and humiliation he had experienced in his life. But this alone would likely not have made Riley leave the Five-Colored Blades. He might have simply accepted that this was how things were, like many other adventurers, and continued to be Heinz's party member. But the final crack was one particular request the party received. That request was to capture a vampire and a dark elf witch who had succumbed to his temptations and given birth to a damp. It was an unusual request, but when they actually accepted it, they quickly succeeded in completing it. The witch's archery and magic were no match for them, and the vampire was nowhere to be found. Heinz thrust his sheathed sword into her stomach and that was the end of it. They received their reward and put that town behind them. However, after completing that request, Heinz began to brood upon his thoughts often and say things that Riley couldn't understand. Riley had a bad feeling about it, but he remembered how Heinz had done the same when he had just become an adventurer after cutting down a pregnant female goblin. Riley forced himself to believe that Heinz would overcome it like before. He realized that he was mistaken when Heinz turned down an invitation to a party sponsored by an important nobleman. Tonight is the festival of Alder. I would certainly like to hear the heroic tale of how you cleansed the land of that evil witch, the nobleman's messenger said. Heinz replied with a no. That important nobleman was one of the most prominent figures in the Mage Shield Nation, and he was particularly influential at the Adventurers Guild. Why did you refuse an invitation from someone like that? We can't stay uninvolved with high society if we want to increase our ranks, even if it's a pain. How many times have we said that? Riley demanded. I can't believe that she was a witch, replied Heinz. I've started to doubt whether this country, whether Aldo is right. It's hopeless. I can't follow this guy anymore, thought Riley, the moment he heard Heinz's response. Riley was an adventurer. He accepted requests, fought monsters and earned gold. He would be promoted, gain fame and honor, retire at an older age after a successful career and then live out the rest of his years in comfort. Riley wouldn't tell Heinz not to have his ideals and chase his dreams. After all, Riley himself had dreamed of becoming the protagonist of a heroic folk song. That was why he wasn't so concerned about others. So I don't really care about Heinz's ideals, dreams or sense of justice. But why do I have to suffer for them? Yeah, sure. You're a genius. I'm sure all the bards in the future will sing heroic tales with you as the protagonist. Even if you refuse an important nobleman's invitation, I'm sure you'll be fine. Even if you doubt the nation's sense of values and national religion, even if you go to the Orborn Kingdom where dampers are treated as people, I'm sure you'll overcome any problems you face with the powers you believe in and the bonds you have with others. On top of that, you'll rush to A-class and S-class, and fame, gold, status and women will come to you one after another. But I'm definitely different. I don't believe I can go to an enemy nation that we've been warring with for hundreds of years to uphold the unspoken law that nations have nothing to do with adventurers. Even if I overcame the difficulties and somehow followed you, even then, I'd just be one of Heinz's companions, right? Don't, censored, with me. After leaving the Five Colored Blades, Riley signed a specialist contract with the aforementioned important nobleman, Earl Palpapek. After that, he reached B-class and acquired his title, becoming known as Riley, the Green Wind Spear. It was all due to Earl Palpapek's influence, however. But Riley didn't care. He had always possessed the ability that deserved such recognition, and the only reason he hadn't received that recognition was because he had been in Heinz's shadow. In Riley's heart, this had become the absolute truth. However, not having the same luck that Heinz had been blessed with, he was unable to gather reliable companions. The more capable ones were audacious and didn't listen to him. Those who didn't listen to him were of no use. Left with no other choice, he worked solo or in temporary parties to become more well-known and have others begging him to become his companions. During this time, he joined forces with the high priest who had been involved in the business with the witch, in order to slay the damp who had escaped at that time and his subordinate ghouls, which ended in wasted effort. But this was a trivial matter. However, misfortune befell Riley once more after that. Frustrated at the fact that he couldn't gather companions, Riley came up with the idea of purchasing slaves and raising them as adventurers. He had heard the stories of the legendary champion Bellwood, who had rehabilitated criminal slaves at the time, turning them into reliable companions who constantly protected him on the battlefield. Riley used the money he had saved up until that point to purchase slaves to use in battle and began training them as adventurers. Unlike the adventurers he had encountered so far, the slaves were obedient and quite useful. However, their superficial skills were nowhere near enough to keep up with those of Riley, a B-class adventurer. Even after acquiring the slave user job and acquiring the strengthened slave's skill, the improvements were moderate at best. And in the Mage Shield Nation, a nation of the Amid Empire, slaves possessed rights as humans. If Riley used the slaves in reckless ways, he would be accused of abusing them, and slaves of races created by Vida who had no human rights were few and far between in the western regions of the continent. And then Riley had arrived at the idea of using criminal slaves. This had caused him to be ostracized by Earl Palpapek, his employer, but Riley himself never noticed this. Rather than believing that the Earl had shuffled him away as a card, he believed that it was he who had shuffled the Earl away. "Earl Palpabek is an idiot, isn't he?" exclaimed Riley, holing up in his mansion like a turtle when he could return to being the marshal if he put more achievements to his name in this expedition. "I don't really care that he's being a coward, but I don't want him to take away my opportunities to increase my fame as well. But thanks to that, Marshal Legston introduced us to General Morvid, didn't he?" said Messara, the female mage with an overly sensual appearance. "You are capable of more than ending up as the employee of a vassal nation's Earl, Riley-sama." Messara had become a master of the Mages Guild at a young age, but in order to preserve her youth and beautiful appearance, she practiced the evil sorceries detailed in the Forbidden Archives. At least 10 children were confirmed to have been kidnapped from the village and murdered by her. She had been a bizarre serial killer who had covered her entire body in the fresh blood of her victims. "Heh, you're completely right," said Jenny, the small scout who was a former class adventurer. "The entire nation is expecting Aniki to become the successor to the tragic hero, and if things go well, he'll be able to get his hands on the magic spear artifact, won't he? With that, surpassing A-class to become S-class won't be a mere dream." Jenny had been an excellent adventurer who worked solo, but the hidden side of him was that he was a fiend who did evil acts such as setting traps for other adventurers and robbed them of their achievements, their fortunes and their lives, and tricking new adventurers to sell them to underground slave traders. Flark, the shield-bearer, remained silent. He looked to be more decent than the other two at first glance, however, that didn't change the fact that he was a criminal slave. He was the leader of a mercenary band who would earn their living as bandits during times of peace. He had personally killed more people than the other two members of his current party. In spite of the requests that Riley successfully completed, he had gained a bad reputation by forming a party made entirely of criminal slaves. He came to the incorrect conclusion that this was why he wasn't being promoted to A-class. Just as he decided to gather more achievements to his name in the upcoming expedition to turn things in his favor, Earl Palpabek, who had signed a specialist contract with Riley, told Riley that he wouldn't participate in the expedition and would offer Riley no assistance if he wanted to participate in the expedition on his own. As Riley searched for ways to continue gathering achievements to his name, he overheard that Earl Legston, the current marshal, was searching for skilled adventurers to join the expedition. When Riley accepted, things proceeded so smoothly that everything seemed like some kind of joke. He was promoted to A-class. His specialist contract with Earl Palpabek was nullified so that he didn't have to pay an enormous fine for breaching his contract, and his interview with Marshal Legston was a success. And then he had been hired by General Morvid, the commander of the expedition. And the beings behind that general were, "But are you fine with this?" asked Riley. "I'm the second coming of Mikhail, the divine spear of ice. I'm Riley, the green wind spear. Won't your bosses be mad at you for doing business with me?" The vampires gave wry smiles in response to his question. "We don't mind. We are companions with common goals in this expedition. Isn't that right?" Taking advantage of Riley's ambitions, the vampires working for the purebreed vampire Turnisha had made him an offer. They had asked him, "Don't you want to become a hero?" And then Riley had accepted that offer. "Yeah, there's no doubt that I do," he had replied. Riley wanted gold, but achievements came first. That was why, as advance payment, he had been given the honor to be the first to clear the tunnel in the Boundary Mountain Range. And then during this expedition, he would gain the achievements of having exterminated the fiendish Damper and the two noble-born vampires who were traitors to the vampire community. If things fared well, Riley would sign a specialist contract with the Morvid family of earls. By the time he retired he would have a court rank and be able to live a resplendent life in the Amid Empire. He wasn't concerned that his home country would suffer as a result of this expedition. The vampires had gained the convenience of having an influential ally involved in the expedition, someone to act as bait for their damp target, and, of course, someone who could be used in battle. "Or perhaps you wish for immortality?" one of the vampires had asked Riley. Messara had an expression of desire on her face, but Riley had shaken his head with a wry smile. "I'll pass. I quite like the honor of living an earthly life," he had replied. "Who'd want to become a vampire? I'd rather not live hundreds of years and still be ordered around by someone else." This was how Riley saw the vampires. How unfortunate. Seeing through Riley's intentions, the vampires had quickly withdrawn their offer. Making use of him just on this expedition was sufficient for them, so there was no need to be persistent. "Aniki, we're almost at the exit," said Jenny. The tunnel had been sealed off by countless boulders ahead, where Jenny was pointing. But his nose hadn't missed the smell of fresh air coming from the gaps in between the boulders. Mesara examined the other side of the boulders with magic. She felt a small response. "There are a few undead," she said. "Are they strong?" asked Riley. "No. They are rank 2 at best." "Then there's no problem. You guys step back. It's time for Zephyr, my magic spear of wind, to shine." Riley raised Zephyr, his prided magic spear. Wind gathered to him from within the tunnel and 100 rending screw thrusts. He unleashed an advanced martial skill with Zephyr, a rapid series of twisting thrusts with their penetrating power enhanced by the wind attribute mana imbued in the spear. Letting out deafening sounds, each thrust of Riley's spear easily broke and blew away a part of the wall of boulders that likely weighed dozens of tons. Flour clept through the hole that formed as a result, ensuring that the other side was safe. He looked around silently. "What, there aren't any undead after all," said Riley. Only ruined fields and forests were to be found on the other side of the boulders. There was no sign of anything that resembled an undead. "Oh? How strange. I wonder if they were hit by the boulders you sent flying," Mesara suggested. Fragments of the boulders that Riley had destroyed were scattered around. Though they were fragments, the larger ones were the size of human heads, large enough to defeat rank 2 monsters if they were hit. "I suppose so," Riley exhaled. "So this is the air of a land unexplored by people. The wind is quite good. How should I describe it in my autobiography?" "We must ask that you do not write about us in that autobiography," said one of the vampires. As Riley stood there with a smirk on his face, the vampires walked past him. They took magic items resembling compasses from their pockets, poured a red liquid onto them and began measuring something. "Master vampires, what might those be?" "Master vampires, what might those be?" asked Jenny. "It is a device that detects the location of vampires," a vampire replied. "With this, we can find out where the traitors are." Even the vampires didn't know the exact location of the damper and the vampire traitors. That was why they were using these devices to find their destination. If Earl Palpapek learned of this, he would laugh at the crudeness of their plan and the fact that they hadn't investigated the damp's location beforehand, and then feel disappointed in himself for not being able to stop this plan. "There's no response for Sir Krent's blood," said one of the vampires. "Has he been killed?" "The search radius reaches all the way to the Orborn Kingdom from here," said another. "I suppose we should assume that he's dead." "What about Eleonora?" "Wait, I'm taking measurements now." They poured Eleonora's blood that they had stored onto the magic items and looked at the response. "There she is. Northeast of here, the area near where Taylersheim should be, according to the records." "What? Then does this mean that the damper and his ghouls are in those ruins?" "Hey. That's convenient." Upon hearing the vampire's conversation, Riley's lips twisted in a good-humored smile. "The failure of the Mage Shield Nation and Mikhail, the hero of 200 years ago, will be made up for by me, the hero of the modern age," he exclaimed. "I'll take back the National Treasure artifact while I'm at it, too. Everything's going just as I wanted. The goddess of destiny smiles on me." Having taken oil from the seeds of the defeat flower, whose trees had become immortal lints, Vandalay was trying his hand at making his own mayonnaise. Giga eggs, fruit vinegar and oil. He had gathered all of the ingredients. What he hadn't possessed was the equipment to make it, but Vandalay had made those as well. An iron bowl and a hand mixer-shaped golem, made of iron. Though they were heavy, Vandalay didn't struggle while handling them due to his superhuman strength skills and high attribute values. And then Vandalay mixed the ingredients on and on. He used Demon Flame, the blue-white flame spell that absorbed heat, to cool the ingredients down and continued mixing. "Vandalay, are you alright?" asked Darsa. "Yes, of course." Vandalay didn't know why Darsa was worrying about him, but his silent, expressionless face looked quite unhealthy in the light of the blue flame. It was only natural that Darsa was worried. "Hey, that's a flavoring as well, isn't it? Then can't you have it made by golems like Defeat Flower Oil, Nori and Kombu?" asked Darsa. Vandalay had indeed already automated the manufacturing process for Defeat Flower Oil using golems and magic items. "I do intend to do that in the future," he said in response to Darsa's question. "When making mayonnaise, you don't add the oil all at once. You have to add it slowly like I'm doing now. So even if I make golems do it, mayonnaise won't be produced." The golems created by Vandalay had more applications than golems created through regular alchemy, but they were not all-purpose. The golems wouldn't know the rate at which the oil needed to be added if Vandali didn't specify it. Hand mixers, spinning fans and massage golems were simple, however. He just needed to limit their moving parts and instruct them on how fast or slow, how strong or weak their movements should be. However, when it came to making food, Vandali needed to give them specific instructions. "I wish I'd tried making handmade mayonnaise on Earth or in my previous life," said Vandali. He had experienced cooking for himself on Earth, but he certainly hadn't tried making handmade mayonnaise. "Well, once I figure out the trick I am going to automate it with golems, so it's just this one time." Vandali intended to have a food sampling meeting and hear everyone's opinions before then, but considering the reactions to miso, fish sauce, kombu and katsuobushi, he could only imagine that the mayonnaise would be welcomed by everyone. The ghouls and undead titans had a particularly strong liking for foods with thick flavors. The same was true for the black goblins, Anubises and Orcuses. He had the feeling that it might cause blood pressure problems, but their physiology was different to the humans of Earth, so it was probably fine. So everyone would probably take a liking to mayonnaise, but there was the risk of producing more junkies. No, it would definitely produce junkies. Even so, Vandali wanted to eat food with mayonnaise. And the Onisan at the trading post told me that she wanted me to make a new product, so I suppose it's fine, isn't it? Really? If you're tired, make sure you rest, okay? Darsa told Vandali. Okay. And then only the whirring sound of the hand mixer golem could be heard. "Vandali-sama, did you need anything?" asked Eleonora as she appeared. Vandali had called her here to taste test the mayonnaise once it was completed. "Are you perhaps researching the cause of a disease?" "No, I'm making a new flavoring," replied Vandali. This scene may certainly not appear to be cooking to a person from this world, but wasn't the misunderstanding a little too terrible? Though he was indeed doing research on diseases as well. Many of this world's inhabitants had no concrete knowledge when it came to pathogens. In fact, the great majority of them were unaware of the existence of tiny organisms that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. The exceptions were very knowledgeable people, those who brewed alcoholic drinks and bread merchants. This was likely why Eleonora had misunderstood, but I'm sorry, I'd thought that I had been summoned so that you can experiment as to whether it would work on vampires. It seemed that she had come with the intention of being an experimental subject. "No, I wanted you to try this mayonnaise," Vandali told her. "I see," said Eleonora. "But to mistake that for research on the cause of a disease, I am willing to accept any punishment." "So you should, then, as a punishment, please taste this." A year had already passed since Eleonora's addition to Vandali's allies. For some reason, she had never changed. She was always begging him to punish her for something. Vandali had found it tiring to keep up with her at first, but now he was completely used to it. He had decided to treat her well while calling his treatment punishment, but Vandali-sama, this is not punishment. You should order me to offer you my blood, or spend the day as a replacement for your furniture, said Eleonora. This was how things were. The idea of telling her to let her use her lap as a pillow as a punishment next time suddenly occurred to Vandali. Eleonora-san? I think it's a little too early for Vandali to be involved in those kinds of things, said Darsa. No, I didn't mean it in that way. Eleonora panicked and shook her head, so it didn't seem like she was simply an individual with tastes for such things. Leaving that aside, the mayonnaise was almost finished. Unlike the vinegar, the giga eggs and the defeat flower oil taken from immortal int hadn't existed on Earth and in origin. Perhaps because the ratio of ingredients was different, because the ingredients themselves were also different. Vandali's attempts to make mayonnaise so far had room for improvement. But this time, it was possible that he had the perfected product. He decided to first scoop some up with his finger to taste it, and then try applying it to a salad of wild vegetables. Now then, time to taste. Vandali suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Vandali? Darsa called out to him in concern. Mom, it seems that the vampires' pawns in the Mage Shield Nation are approaching, he said. Ah, is that so? Darsa looked concerned. Was there a response from your surveillance undead? Asked Eleonora, looking surprised. But to think that they would immediately know where we are. Vandali set aside his experimental mayonnaise. Now then, let's gather everyone and have a discussion, he said. I'll explain the information that the surveillance undead gathered. Please listen while tasting the mayonnaise. They might arrive as early as autumn or winter. Next year's spring at latest. But they were insects being drawn to a light. Name, Riley race, human age, 25 titles, Green Wind Spear, the second coming of the tragic hero job, slave user level, 47 job history, apprentice warrior, warrior, spearman, magic spear user passive skills, strengthened attribute values when equipped with a spear, medium enhanced attribute values, agility, level 5 strengthened attribute values when equipped with non-metal armor, medium intuition, level 3 detect presence, level 2 strengthened slaves, level 2 active skills, spear technique, level 8 armor technique, level 5 throwing, level 5 dismantling, level 2 silent steps, level 2 surpass limits, magic spear, level 4 training, level 1 overpower, level 1. Chapter 56, I'm crowned as a result of the mayonnaise meeting. Other than those who were absent as they were clearing dungeons, Vandali had gathered his main companions in the hall of the royal castle. They had to discuss what to do now that the invasion of the Mage Shield Nation and vampires had been confirmed. They also had to taste test the mayonnaise trial product. Delicious. It's ridiculously delicious. Borkus exclaimed. I think it needs a little more impact. How about adding some wasabi to it? Vigoro suggested. I see, said Zadyrus. I think it is quite acceptable as it is. This is. I have never tasted a flavor like this. Vandali-sama, what did you use to create this? Asked Eleonora. Bone Chimera made a noise and Rapisage let out a groan. Eh? Wah, there was a scream. Ah. Rapisage is getting a hold of Terra-san to get the mayonnaise stuck around her mouth. Saria exclaimed. Please stop her instead of just watching. Terra shouted. Aha, we can't hear the words of Terra-san who gets to try out delicious foods that we can't eat, Rita told her. No, you heartless fool. It cannot be helped. Here, I will give you this, so stop. Zadyrus offered Rapisage the mayonnaise on her finger. Rapisage put her finger in her mouth and began sucking. Boy, this zombie girl is sucking on my finger with all of her strength. The intelligence of the undead really does drop if I don't use the body's original spirit, Vandali observed. Adding more spirits turned out to be quite pointless as well. Military matters had been set aside, leaving the mayonnaise tasting to be the current topic. Nobody could win against their appetites. Well, Rapisage wasn't intelligent enough to have discussions or anything like that. Other than listening to Vandali's commands, she was just a normal zombie and couldn't speak a single word. Vandali had tried adding more spirits to her like with Bone Man, but it had no effect at all. Maybe Bone Man was a special case, or perhaps a suitable amount of learning and life experience was needed. Vandali decided to assume that it was the latter and wait for her to develop. Zombies and skeletons, like children, could not be raised hastily. Rappy, release Zadyrus's finger from your mouth, Vandali ordered. Rapisage groaned as she released Zadyrus's brown-grey finger from her purple lips, leaving a sticky string between it and her blue tongue. The color of Rapisage's lips and tongue had changed for some reason after Vandali had turned her into a zombie. He had properly stopped her decomposition with preservation, however. Zadyrus let out a disgruntled noise. She even went and licked my claws. It is not my fault if she is paralyzed. She is an undead, after all, said Vandali. I am aware of that. Her stitches are clearly visible. Terra let out a sigh of relief. I almost had my lips taken by a zombie of the same sex right before Vansama's eyes. We must not let down our guards or show any weaknesses, said Eleonora. Both Terra and Eleonora hastily wiped their mouths. Zombies in fictional works on Earth often had poor eyesight but a sharp sense of smell to make up for it, but this wasn't the case for zombies in Lambda. In Rapisage's case, since her head was that of a human, her senses were almost identical to those of a human other than the dark vision skill she had gained as an undead. Wiping the mayonnaise away from their mouths was enough to stop Rapisage from noticing it. Taking that into account, the zombies in Earth's fiction could actually be considered to have quite high specs. Now then, about the Mage Shield Nation's army, Vandali began. It's obvious that we're going to slaughter them all, isn't it? Borkus interrupted. More importantly, isn't there any more mayonnaise? It was an experimental product, so there's no more, Vandali told him. What? Then let's make some more. Vandali, how do you make it? Vigoro demanded. Wait, I am sure it is impossible because there are insufficient ingredients, said Zadyrus. Boy, what do you need for it? I'll make it, so just listen to what I have to say, said Vandali. It seemed that the Lambda-made mayonnaise was a success. After that, excluding Rapesage and Notchen, everyone including Vandali exchanged information and discussed what to do against the Mig Shield Nation while making mayonnaise. This would later come to be known as the mayonnaise meeting of Talersheim. While Vandali was creating mayonnaise, the boulders sealing off the tunnel leading to the Mig Shield Nation were destroyed, and adventurers and vampires emerged from within. Judging from the contents of their conversation, the vampires who worship Hukaka, the evil god of joyful life, were utilizing the Empire and Mig Shield Nation in order to repeat the Talersheim invasion of 200 years ago. They had used magic items to determine Eleonora's location and concluded that Vandali was in Talersheim. However, it seemed that they currently had no plans to conduct reconnaissance in Talersheim. Vandali and the ghouls had previously escaped from the Devil's Nest forest without fighting, so they were wary that the same thing would happen again. They were also wary of the risk that if casualties were suffered during reconnaissance, Vandali would gain information from their spirits. Eleonora looked mortified. I do recall them taking my blood on numerous occasions, but I didn't realize that such magic items existed. Well, don't worry about it, said Vandali. It's convenient because they're coming straight here. So now the 4 members of the adventurer party and one of the vampires is guarding the tunnel's exit. The other 2 vampires have returned to their community to let them know. It seems the Mig Shield Nation has been contacted through magic items. As to be expected of a community of vampires with pure breeds who had lived for hundreds of thousands of years standing at the top. It seemed that they possessed all kinds of magic items that Eleonora had no knowledge about. With that said, those magic items were tools to locate traitors, quite fitting of them considering the teachings of the evil god of joyful life and Berkine's personality. Did they find Valen's father's location with this item as well? Well, leaving that aside. So when do you think they will arrive? Asked Zadyrus. It seems they haven't come to a concrete decision yet. Judging from the adventurers' conversation, adventurers and knights would come through the tunnel to confirm its safety and protect the exit. The adventurers would then return. At the same time, a war council led by the Mid Empire would take place to discuss the tunnel's discovery and the upcoming invasion. In that war council, things like budgets, the number of soldiers and knights that needed to be mobilized and where they were to be mobilized from would be decided. There were plans to dispatch priests of the Church of Alder to scatter holy water around the tunnel, under the pretense of removing ancient, evil spirits. In reality, this was likely a measure against Vandali, who was assumed to be a spiritualist. And then the Mid Empire and Mig Shield Nation would jointly make a grand announcement of the expedition. There would be extravagant ceremonies and festivals to increase the citizens' morale. And then a party would be held in the Mid Empire in anticipation of General Morved's victory in this expedition. The Order of Prodigal Knights would depart the Empire and join up with the vampires who would disguise themselves as mercenaries. At the same time, the soldiers and knights would be gathered from all over the Mig Shield Nation, more ceremonies would be performed, and, considering the above processes, I think that they'll be here around winter no matter how much they rush things, said Vandali. Would it kill humans to hurry it up? They don't even live for 100 years, so how come they're so patient? Vigoro wondered. Indeed, they should come as soon as possible, Zadyrus said in agreement. For ghouls like Vigoro and Zadyrus, the ceremonies and parties happening indiscriminately would likely seem pointless. Though Vandali might have seen the point in having parties, the ceremonies did indeed seem like a waste of time. Well, without them, the morale of the knights and soldiers might decrease. Humans like those kinds of ceremonies, said Terra. It's easier to think of them as creatures with those in their nature and way of life, Eleonora added. Both of them were former humans, after all. A long time ago, your father told me that great people must show how great they are, said Darsa. Well, that was how it was. Vandali was aiming to become a nobleman, even if he couldn't have any successors, so having to do those kinds of things would be a problem. Then I'm sure they'll come in spring, said Borkus. It doesn't snow around here, even in winter, but it'll get cold. Just as he said, winter was harsh in Talersheim, a city surrounded by mountains. Despite there being no snow, it was ridiculously cold. The snow would stop on the mountains to both the east and west, but the cold would come straight over the mountains and blow down on the city. It would be harsh on an army to march in those conditions. At a normal walking pace, it would take 5 days to reach Talersheim from that tunnel. After coming out of the tunnel, though there would be no snow, the roads weren't maintained, and even with the records of Talersheim's direction from 200 years ago, it would almost certainly be impossible to proceed while avoiding the devil's nests that had spread across everywhere. Considering the terrain that the army needed to march across, if they did it during winter, they would be greatly weakened before even reaching Talersheim. Well, I'm sure those guys won't be very familiar with the climate in this area, Balkus added. But I think they'll be cautious because they're unfamiliar with it, said Vandali. I'm sure vampires don't care about the cold of winter, but they're planning to make use of a human army this time. It's unlikely they'll force a movement during the winter. Indeed, if they were going to push in during the winter, the vampires would have attacked alone without joining forces with the humans, Eleonora added. Everyone present was discussing things with serious expressions. However, they all had a hand mixer in one hand and a container of oil in the other. They were adding oil to a bowl and mixing the contents to create mayonnaise. It was a very surreal sight. So they'll come in spring after all, Vandali concluded. Ah, Balkus, you're adding the oil too fast. They surely wouldn't drag things on all the way up until summer, so their arrival would likely be spring. This is quite troublesome, Balkus remarked. Making delicious things is a troublesome process, said Zadyrus. The boy is always doing these things. We're making them when we can't even eat them yet, so please don't complain, said Saria. So what are we going to do about the adventurers and vampires guarding the tunnel? Should we dispose of them first? Asked Vigoro. Though that is an attractive option, we'll leave them be, replied Vandali. There were numerous reasons to leave them alone. First, there were nothing to be gained by doing so. Even if a few adventurers and vampires were killed or captured, they would gain no information and there would be no point. The enemy was expending its resources to gather an expedition army. Vandali couldn't imagine that Riley or the vampires would know anything about it at this stage. The same went for the vampires' fighting forces. It was also impossible to imagine that those who would be stationed as lookouts would be in important positions. It would be quite troublesome to travel to the tunnel entrance where Riley and the others were in the first place. There were no roads or anything of the sort, and they would have to traverse multiple devil's nests to get there as well. Balkus and the others had gone there once last year and defeated quite a lot of monsters along the way, but since a year had passed, other monsters would have replaced them and taken their territory. Stealthily approaching the tunnel while fighting those monsters, attacking the people at the tunnel and then coming back would be quite a lot of effort. There was also a high chance of failure. And even if they succeeded, it might only make the enemy warier. When you say that it's an attractive option, did you mean there was someone notable there? Asked Darsa. An adventurer called the Greenwind Spear Riley, replied Vandali. I've heard his voice before. The voices of Heinz's companions, voices that he couldn't forget. The voices of the ones who had held a memorial for Darsa by spending the money they earned from capturing and selling her over to High Priest Gordon to buy drinks on the day she was burned alive. As Vandali explained this, everyone's expressions stiffened and Darsa looked at her son in worry. Vandali, for now she began. Yes, for now, we're going to leave them be. I'm not going to do anything like sneak off by myself to kill them, so don't worry, Mom, said Vandali, reassuring her. Vandali wanted to avenge her. If he didn't, there was no telling when they would come again to kill him. If possible, he wanted to kill Riley personally, but if it was impossible then it was fine. It seems he's participating in the expedition, so if we meet him on the battlefield, please leave him to me, Vandali requested. But he's an A-class adventurer, so be careful. Ho ho, an A-class, eh? Balkus seemed excited. I want to see how well my strength holds up against an adventurer, said Vigoro. Jayu, this incites the fighting spirit, Bone Man added. Yes, Zadyrus agreed. There is no reason to hold back against adventurers in these circumstances. Everyone was fired up for battle. Their opponent was clearly an enemy, and he had even joined forces with the vampires. He was Vandali's nemesis. There was no reason to show mercy or sympathy. He's apparently named himself the Second Coming of Mikhail, said Vandali. Seriously? An A-class spear user, this is getting more and more interesting. Balkus seemed to have a particularly strong desire to kill Riley. And since Riley would be an outstanding, prominent part of the expedition army's fighting force, the morale of the troops would decrease if he were to be defeated. Vandali definitely wanted to come back to Talersheim holding Riley's head. Balkus-san, everyone, thank you for doing so much for me and Vandali, said Darsa. But please don't do anything reckless, okay? Of course, said Zadyrus. By the way, boy, is it going to be finished soon? She asked Vandali. I think mine will be done soon, too, said Terra. The mayonnaise was complete, and everyone poured it over wild vegetables and mixed it with wasabi, garlic and ginger to smear onto meat, trying various different applications of mayonnaise. Vandali got the impression that the mayonnaise made with ghee, eggs and defeat flour oil had a thicker flavor than the mayonnaise of Earth. I have a feeling it would go well with okonomiyaki and takoyaki, but the acorn powder production is, for Vandali, the food-related problems were more troublesome than the problem of dealing with the expedition army, for which he had made preparations long ago. Fortunately, the acorns of immortal ints had less of a harsh taste even without being rinsed in water, so they could be turned into acorn powder straight away. However, because of the number of immortal ints, the amount of acorn powder that could be produced in a single day was insufficient for Taylorsheim's current population. Well, if things go well, the problem should be resolved around next year's early summer or so. So, as we originally planned, we will annihilate the expedition army, and after that, we will replenish our disposable fighting forces. Following that, we will deal severe damage to the Mage Shield Nation to cut down their strength before destroying the tunnel. This was Vandali's announcement of the final plan. Everyone cheered in unison, except for AP Sage, whose cheer was a little late because she had been busy licking mayonnaise. Why did the Mage Shield Nation need to be dealt heavy damage and have its strength cut down in addition to the annihilation of the expedition army? Was it because of the resentment Vandali harbored towards them? Was it to take revenge for the events of 200 years ago? Vandali couldn't deny that these reasons were there, but there was an unexpectedly proper, logical reason as well. First, it was fundamentally impossible for the current Taylorsheim to even have peaceful relations with the Mage Shield Nation and the Amid Empire it belonged to, let alone a mutually beneficial relationship. For the human society in the Amid Empire, Taylorsheim was not a nation. It was simply a pack of dangerous monsters who had settled into the ruins of a city. There was no difference between them and a pack of goblins other than the size of the pack and the threat they posed. Though the Titans were a race created by Vida, they were indeed a civilization of people. Despite that, the Mage Shield Nation had slaughtered every last one of them without sending any messengers, without making any demands for the Titans to surrender, without taking any prisoners. They would likely accept a request to stand down once they realized that their forces were inferior, but there was a high chance that they would simply come back with an even larger, more powerful expedition army at a later time. They would continue to make all kinds of schemes and attempts without being discouraged by their failures and setbacks. If years or decades passed, there might be hope for negotiations on even terms. However, it was difficult to imagine that the Church of Elder would remain quiet, and considering what Sage had said, it was unlikely that words alone would convince the Empire that worshipped Elder. On top of that, there were influential individuals positioned quite deep in the Amid Empire and Mage Shield Nation, working with the vampires who worshipped Hihireushukaka, the evil god of joyful life. Trying to have friendly relations with them would only end in those relations being taken advantage of. Vandali wanted to strike a blow to the Mage Shield Nation in addition to annihilating the expedition army because he had learned from historical failures. For the Amid Empire, it was important to maintain its position above its vassal states. Like the invasion of 200 years ago, the important figures in the Amid Empire were using this expedition to cut down the strength as a nation that the Mage Shield Nation had gathered recently. In other words, there was a high chance that even if this expedition army was repelled, another invasion would happen when the Mage Shield Nation's strength increased again. Conversely, the Mage Shield Nation's strength was decreased, they would never consider an expedition to cross the boundary mountain range. This would be true no matter how influential the individuals who were working with the vampires were, no matter how loudly those of the Church of Elder screamed. The Amid Empire's enemy was the neighboring Orborm Kingdom, after all. If they ignored this fact and continued to repeat these expeditions, eventually it would be not only the Mage Shield Nation, but the Amid Empire losing strength as well, and then they would lose the war against the Orborm Kingdom. Well, I can't do anything about the vampires, but as long as I destroy the tunnel, they'll be held back for a while this time, for a few years, maybe a decade. The reason Vandali hadn't destroyed the tunnel leading to the Mage Shield Nation after discovering it was to deliberately leave a route for the vampires and Mage Shield Nation, so that he could sense when they made a move. If the vampires found another route across the mountain range, it would have been difficult to know about it in advance. However, now that the tunnel's purpose had been fulfilled, it was best to destroy it. Even if no more armies came, it would be problematic if adventurers came through individually. There would be nothing more troublesome than A-class adventurer parties to be drawn by the phrase, the unexplored southern reaches of the continent, and loiter around. So, kid. It's going to be war from here on, isn't it? Borkus, who was eating a bowl full of with mayonnaise with a satisfied expression, suddenly opened his mouth to speak. I suppose so, Vandali replied. It would be a monster hunt from the enemy's point of view, but from here, it would be a battle to hold the city followed by a reverse invasion. It would certainly be a war. Then we're going to need all kinds of things, said Borkus. I suppose but Terra and Datara have made plenty of equipment. We have enough meat and fish to last us until spring. We can gather acorns, walnuts and oil from immortal ints, and we're alright on honey as well. There are canals running through the city for water, and there are multiple wells as well. Is there something you had in mind? Since there were dungeons near Talersheim, the city's defenses were powerful. This was true 200 years ago, but its defenses had become even more powerful now that the Titans had become undead and Vandali had come. The stockpiled food could be preserved almost indefinitely, and over half of Talersheim's fighting forces were undead and golems anyway. Ghouls had a proper need to eat, but, in the worst-case scenario, they could simply use the enemy soldiers as a source of food, so there wouldn't be any problems. Even if the waterways were poisoned, Vandali could immediately use disinfect to remove it. He couldn't think of anything that needed to be gathered immediately. It's obvious, isn't it? Said Borkus. You need a general to fight a war. This again? It seemed that Borkus hadn't given up on putting Vandali on Talersheim's throne. Considering that the nation was bankrupt right now, Vandali didn't think there would be any meaning to him becoming Talersheim's king. Vansama, I think you should accept it at this point in time, said Terra. That's right, Botjan, the stone statue of you in the plaza is finished too. Saria exclaimed. There are a lot of things I want to say regarding that, but Vandali's words became inarticulate as he remembered the statue of himself that had been erected in the plaza in front of the royal castle. That stone statue had been well made. Vandali did realize that the stonemasons had taken pride in their work to create it. However, the stone statue's face was full of expression, so it somehow didn't resemble Vandali. But Vandali-sama, the humans of the Orborn Kingdom cannot come here, can they? Then isn't there no need to worry? As Eleonora pointed out, the tunnel at the Orborn Kingdom's side of the mountain range had been destroyed in a manner that made it impossible to repair with normal methods. Vandali didn't know how advanced engineering technology was in this world, but wouldn't it be difficult even if 100 first-rate Earth attribute mages worked to get there? Even Vandali, who possessed the Golem transmutation skill and a mana pool of over 200 million, would need several days to repair the tunnel. In fact, it would be faster to dig another tunnel in a completely different location, but there was a story of a nation that had tried to dig such a tunnel several thousand years ago, only for monsters living beneath the Earth's surface to emerge and trample over the surrounding lands, leading to the nation's destruction. The moral of the story was, don't touch the mountain range. Well, that's true, but Vandali was still hesitant. Also, from the enemy's point of view, you are already something like the king of this place. Tell me this, boy. When war begins, who will be giving commands? Zadaris asked. Borkus, Vigoro, Zadaris, those are commanders on the battlefield, said Zadaris, interrupting Vandali's reply. Who will be in command of the entire army? Is it me? Of course, said Rita. Everything has been done according to your commands, haven't they, Botjan? As she said, the preparations and strategies for war against the expedition fort and vampires that would come in next year's spring had all been made by Vandali. Of course, he had listened to everyone's opinions and made adjustments, added new parts to his plans and removed poorly planned parts when they pointed out his mistakes. However, the one who had suggested all of the strategies overall was Vandali. And where in Talersheim would you find someone who would answer with anything but your name if they were asked who the leader was? I would answer that it's you, Vandali, said Vigoro. You. Your existence is essential to Talersheim, my lord, Bone Man added. Even the distribution of items at the trading post would halt if you were to disappear. Vandali was already for a long time, Vandali had been a leader to Talersheim's inhabitants. For the ghouls and the new monster races he had created, he was the Ghoul King. For the undead titans, he was the Holy Sun. And for the others like Rita, Eleonora and the cemetery bees, he was their master. And as Bone Man had pointed out, Talersheim's everyday life would vanish without Vandali. The golems in his factories would continue to move until they ran out of mana, and the smoking facilities would continue to produce katsuobushi. The mayonnaise they had made just now would take some effort, but it could be made. However, miso and fish sauce couldn't be made without him, and kombu would take years to make. And though the golems might move for several decades more, they would not continue moving forever. Vandali had never nominated himself for it or made a conscious announcement of it. In fact, he had denied it. but he came to the realization that before he knew it, he had become Talersheim's representative. I'm not satisfied, but well, I'd thought that I would gain the title of prophesized Holy Son, but I never did, so I guess it's alright. And I suppose it's about time I became a leader. Vandali planned to be an adventurer to gain fame in the future, so he had been conscious about his status being revealed for when he registered at a guild, but he finally came to a sudden realization. Leaving aside death attribute magic, death attribute charm, mental corruption and strength and followers, he already had the title of Ghoul King and skills that would be considered abnormal at first glance such as Soul Break and the unique skill, God Slayer. Well, the only person seeing that would be the receptionist at the guild. He couldn't imagine that a guild master would personally oversee the registration of a child. If he dashed out of the guild immediately after registration and began working in other towns, it might not turn out to be such a big deal. Alright. I'll become the king, Vandali announced after convincing himself with these arguments. The levels of the cooking, long distance control and strength and subordinate skill have increased. Chapter 57, The Eclipse King is crowned, and a saint receives a divine message. A week after Vandali was acknowledged as the king of Talersheim, a grand coronation ceremony was held. Isn't it fine for me to just declare that I'll become the king? Asked Vandali. I'll even prepare a proper party afterwards. Holy Son, though this kind of ceremony may seem meaningless at first glance, you must change your way of thinking and realize that there is meaning in consciously acknowledging the fact that you are the king, said Nuaza. With that, it was decided that a proper ceremony would be held and various preparations were made. First was the crown and throne, which Vandali made hastily out of orichalcum, saying, let's make do these for now. They were the color of black metal fragments of the dragon golem that were used as materials for them, but apparently this amount of orichalcum would be worth enough to buy a castle or two. Terry had desperately wanted to build them, but Vandali had her prioritize the manufacturing of arms. These royal orichalcum products would probably be used as materials for shields and armor soon anyway, so he had decided that he would have her build more after the war. After that, the day of the coronation ceremony was announced to everyone and preparations for a feast were made. Vandali had the feeling that this took up most of the week. For the king himself to be cooking, should I call myself the cooking? Vandali wondered. Botchan, what would you do if that actually appeared on your status? Sario asked him. Vandali's pun was not well received. After that, everyone dressed up, albeit in clothes made of clean furs, making them look like a tribe of savages, and stood in rows in the assembly hall built in front of the royal castle. Hey, hey! Why do I have to be a military officer standing at the front? Borkus complained. I'm a free adventurer. Boy, I am still training myself, so I do not think I am fit to take the position of the royal court mage, Zedorus mumbled. Botchan. I am but a coachman and caretaker of horses. Being appointed to a civil official position is too much for the likes of me. Sam exclaimed. I've hardened my resolve, so why has nobody else hardened theirs? Asked Vandali. You all don't know when to give up. Especially you, Sam. Why do you think I made an assembly hall that a carriage can pass through? There was apparently a meaning to the ceremony, so Vandali had mercilessly filled the vacant positions of military officer, civil official and royal court mage. Well, they were more like the nobles' seats in the plaza, however. Now then, the coronation ceremony will now begin, Nuazu announced. He was the one conducting the ceremony. It was customary for the leader of the Church of Veda to conduct it, but as the only current member of the church was him, a former warrior priest, it was necessary for him to act as a substitute for the church's leader. Nuazu had also shown considerable disapproval at acting as the church's leader. But when Vandali had asked him to nominate another suitable candidate, he had accepted his fate once he realized that there was nobody else to nominate. For being able to see this day, we offer our gratitude to the goddess Veda and our ancestor Talos, he said, beginning the ceremony. I am certain that His Majesty the late King, Her Majesty the First Princess Livia and Her Majesty the Second Princess Zandia would also be overjoyed. And then Nuazu would give a small recount of Talersheim's history. Vandali would make a promise to continue that history and bring further prosperity to Talersheim, receive the crown and be bestowed the title of Sun King. And then the coronation ceremony would be over. The festivities would follow that, but however, from today, we are stepping into a new page of history, Nuazu continued. Holy Son, please accept the title of the first Eclipse King and make an oath to bear and uphold Talersheim's royal authority. The title bestowed upon Vandali was not that of Sun King. Considering Talersheim's current state, this title would not be suitable. Taylorsheim was currently livelier at night than during the day. Its inhabitants were the ghouls who could see things sufficiently with moonlight alone, as well as the undead and new monster races that could see in the dark just as well as on a sunny afternoon. The only exceptions were the cemetery bees and immortal ints. That was why Vandaley's title was Eclipse King. The reason it wasn't King of the Dark Night was because it was bad for his image, and because he wanted to have the titans who had evacuated Taylorsheim in the past and their descendants to return one day. Once Vandaley had become an honorary nobleman and secured his position in society, he wanted to conduct various things like commercial trading. That was why he had decided on Eclipse King, associated with a solar eclipse, something that was neither light nor darkness. "I am one with Taylorsheim," Vandaley declared. "Well, in reality, I'll be leaving it and coming back," he thought as he spoke the line that had been announced beforehand and received the orichalcum crown. "Vandaley, the Eclipse King, has been enthroned on this day," said New Arza. The moment he finished speaking, a deafening cheer echoed from people. "You King, King, King." Fists and weapons were thrust into the air above the plaza as the undead and ghouls shouted in joy and praise for Vandaley. Bone chimeras, pteranodon zombies and cemetery bees flew through the air in place of the doves that might be seen in ceremonies on Earth. Everyone had already been told that this coronation ceremony was being conducted for the purpose of defeating the Mage Shield Nation's expedition army. The army of the Mage Shield Nation, which had destroyed Taylorsheim once already, was coming back. Knowing that, their desire for battle was seething within them. Even after becoming undead, the Titans held the view that the sins of the father should not be passed on to the son. But, of course, this did not mean that they would accept the harm that the current generation was trying to inflict on them. If this generation insisted on destroying Taylorsheim as well, they would be crushed without mercy. Darsa was in tears. To think that my Vandaley, who used to be so little, he's still so little, but he's become so great. Vandaley was glad that she was happy enough to cry tears of joy, but he did think that her comment that he was still small to be unnecessary. "This is where Vansama's legend as the High King begins, isn't it?" said Terra. "Terra, that kind of legend isn't going to begin. Now then, today will end with the feast and celebrating with everyone. As for the explanation of the defense policies against the expedition army and what we'll be doing until they arrive, that can come tomorrow." It might appear that Vandaley was taking it easy, but it was currently the end of summer. The enemy would be coming in spring at earliest. In addition, there were surveillance undead and golems placed in set intervals in the areas that the expedition army would pass through once they came out of the tunnel. Once the army approached, Vandaley would know right away. Even if a small number of spies were sent separately from the army, he would know about it. The city's walls also essentially acted as surveillance golems, and even if they made it past the walls, the city was filled with golems. Cemetery bees were flying about in the air, making Vandaley's surveillance network even greater. Everything's perfect. You have acquired the title of Eclipse King. I suppose I had no choice but to gain this title. Vandaley had thought it might be possible that he wouldn't receive an additional title, as prophesized Holy Sun had never become a title, but it seemed that this wasn't the case. "Well, I already have Ghoul King as a title. I've just received 2 king-like titles, so I guess it's fine." As he thought this and looked at everyone, something suddenly occurred to him. There is a thing, or maybe it should be called a component, that we all have in common. I don't know if I can make use of it, but it's worth testing. But this wasn't the time or place to test it, so Vandaley spent the day with everyone, enjoying the feast of foods such as boat-wrapped sashimi, needle-wolf miso hot pots, dinosaur steaks, and fruit agar made with cobol fruits and honey. Bormac Gordon was wearing his priest's garb without his armor, listening to the opinions of the priest warriors that he led. His appearance was that of a good-natured old man. Not only Vandaley, but anyone who had seen him fighting, would doubt their eyes at seeing him like this. "So, you all think that we should not participate in the Mage Shield Nation's expedition, is that right?" Gordon asked his subordinates. "Yes, High Priest Sama. No matter how many times I think about it, I believe we should use our power for other things," said a young boy, barely old enough to be a priest warrior. He seemed nervous, but he voiced his views clearly. "We priest warriors are not soldiers or adventurers. We should not be commanded by the nation's circumstances. We do not hesitate to fight against monsters. But is there any meaning in serving on the expedition?" Priest warriors had originated as priests of churches in remote areas, armed for the purpose of hunting dangerous wild beasts, long before the Demon King created monsters in this world. In the present era, they were clergymen who wielded military power to protect the church and its believers, and to spread their teachings to people living in distant regions. For such priest-warriors, the expedition into the Boundary Mountain Range that was to occur in next year's spring was not something that excited them. They were learned men. It was clear to them that there were political motives behind the expedition, just as there had been for the expedition to Talersheim 200 years ago. And there were no people that needed protecting beyond the Boundary Mountain Range. These two facts made them refuse to participate in the expedition. We believers of Elder, the god of law and fate, are taught to fight against monsters, said another priest-warrior. For priest-warriors in particular, it is our duty to do so. We understand that there is meaning in fighting alongside the expedition army in the Boundary Mountain Range, where monsters are rampant and the remnants of Veda's races hide. But should we not prioritize the protection of the people who are directly exposed to the threat of monsters? The priest-warriors held the opinion that defending remote villages that were threatened by monsters and hunting down vampires hiding in society, as well as those who had fallen to their temptations and were working with them, should take priority over fighting in dangerous, unexplored lands with the army. It could also be considered a conservative opinion to want to choose their sense of duty and strictly adhering to their doctrine. Indeed, what you are saying is reasonable, said Gordon. However, Gordon was also an individual who would choose conservative ideals over fame among the common people and financial gains. If he wasn't, he would not have refused the recommendations that he become the cardinal, nor would he continue fighting on the front lines of battle as a warrior priest even at this age. It is not that we are objecting to exterminating that damper as you wished, High Priest. No, it matters not. That matter is nothing more than my own personal interest. There is no need to take that into consideration. In the long life that he had lived up until now, Gordon had never let a target escape him. No matter how cunningly vampires and lamias had hidden from him, he had found them and exterminated them. He had returned numerous dampers as well as their parents to the dust. With only one exception. That exception was a damp. His name was Vandali, and though his witch mother had been turned into ash and purified, he had survived as a 6-month-old child and then gained the spiritualist job and become the leader of hundreds of ghouls at less than 3 years old. A truly exceptional case among exceptional cases. Vandali had used some unknown method to lead his ghouls across the Boundary Mountain Range and escape. Gordon regretted that he had been unable to prevent that. The fact that he used some unknown method to cross the mountain range means that it is possible that he will use that method to cross the mountain range again to attack us. The southern regions of the Barngaya continent, on the other side of the Boundary Mountain Range. That place was haunted by the races created by Veda, and the surviving pure-breed vampires who possessed immense power were said to dwell there as well. Several hundred ghouls might pose a threat to a single town, but if that damp was left alone, a whole nation no. The entire continent's existence could hang in the balance. That was how Gordon felt. If that damp gains even more subordinates, he could organize a monster army that can freely cross the Boundary Mountain Range that we cannot traverse, and the regions both east and west of the mountain range may be destroyed. That was why when Gordon had been asked whether he would participate in an expedition into the Boundary Mountain Range now that the tunnel had been discovered, his heart had pounded with excitement in a way quite unfitting for his age. He had no doubt that this was an opportunity granted to him by Alder himself. However, the expedition's objectives were to recover the national treasure that was lost in the expedition of 200 years ago, and to purify Talersheim. It was only natural. It was only Gordon who personally regarded Vandali as dangerous. Detailed information wouldn't have been passed on to the upper echelons of the Mage Shield Nation and Amid Empire with the exception of Palpapek, who was the marshal back then. When Gordon thought about it calmly, even if the Boundary Mountain Range was traversed, the southern regions of the continent were vast. There was little hope of finding Vandali in such a place. The only way he would be found was if he was already ready and waiting for the expedition army. That damper is cunning and wary. He will run without hesitation if he believes he cannot win. Conversely, if we do encounter him, it will be only when he believes he will win. As far as Gordon could imagine, Vandali would not appear even if Gordon were to join the expedition army. Only 2 years had passed since then. It was impossible for Vandali to have gathered enough fighting strength to emerge victorious against thousands of elite soldiers. If he were to barricade himself in a fortified city in Talersheim, there might be a chance, but large holes had been made in that city's walls in the war of 200 years ago. They had likely collapsed by now. That was why it was pointless to participate in the expedition. All right, I understand how you feel very well. I will go and reject the proposal of joining the expedition, Gordon decided. But that night, as he offered his prayers to Elder before he slept, he received a divine message like the ones he had received on several previous occasions. The Demon King's shadow stirs once more. It must be found and destroyed? This is my Lord Elder. You are telling me to cross the boundary mountain range and slay that damper, aren't you? Gordon interpreted that it was Elder's plan rather than coincidence that he had received a divine message on the night he had decided to decline participating in the expedition. And in his mind, he linked the Demon King's shadow to Vandali. This deduction was hastily made with a gaping hole in its logic in the fact that not even the first letter of Vandali's name was mentioned in the divine message. But nobody, not even Elder who was the one who had sent the divine message, would have imagined that this deduction was correct. Vandali succeeded in creating a virus to use in the war. It's transmissible through air, across mucous membranes and through blood, and it takes effect within 5 seconds. Its symptoms are only violent nausea, headaches, dizziness, fevers, stomach pain and joint pain, so it takes several days to kill the target, and it will kill less than 10% of those it infects. But I suppose this will do, Vandali concluded. Vandali nodded, looking at the double-headed Tyrannosaurus that was lying on the ground with its tongue hanging out, creating a stain made of saliva, gastric juice and nasal mucus. Botchan, I think that's plenty for an incurable disease, said Rita. If this disease spread to the Mage-Shield Nation and the Amid Empire, the nations would stop functioning, said Saria. You're right, Vandali agreed. But they have life attribute mages and great priests of Elder, so it should be fine. Treating diseases with magic is considerably difficult, and different spells are needed to cure different illnesses, so I believe it may not go so well, said Sam. There are people who have the disease resistance skill and the disease and poison resistance skill that offers resistance against both diseases and poison, but they're quite rare, Cuckoo added. According to Sam and Kuka, neither the Amid Empire nor the Mage-Shield Nation's plans to deal with an epidemic were very sophisticated. They knew of soaking affected parts in alcohol or hot water, but there were no antibiotics in this world. Potions, healing spells and resistance skills existed in their place, but as dealing with diseases went, they were imperfect. Though there were potions to treat diseases, they were expensive and didn't work against all kinds of diseases. It was more commonplace to drink antidote potions to neutralize toxins that had accumulated in the body to lessen the symptoms. The development of healing spells was slow and they were not very advanced. Even if a cold was cured by increasing vitality, using the same spell on a cancer patient would cause cancer cells to metastasize all over the body and cause the patient to die almost immediately. Treating diseases with spells would be impossible without advancements in anatomy and physiology, knowledge of how the body works and how pathogens affect their hosts, and technological innovations. As for resistance skills, few adventurers and knights possessed skills that granted resistance to disease. Most monsters possessed resistance to poison rather than disease, and assassins and mercenaries used poison rather than disease anyway. That was why poison resistance was fairly common, but disease resistance was rare. Those with such weak constitutions that caused them to fall ill frequently enough to acquire resistance skills wouldn't think to become adventurers. Have I created something unexpectedly dangerous? Vandali wondered. But I made it so that its effects will stop after half a day, so I guess it will be fine. Even if the disease did spread, there wouldn't be any casualties since it stopped working in half a day, and with the population density in this world, it wouldn't spread beyond a single village or town. If something unexpected did occur, Vandali would simply have to use brute force with his mana, casting a wide area sterilization. It was as Vandali was justifying the creation of the disease to himself with these excuses that Rita and Saria had come to have a look. So, Botchan, shouldn't we finish it off now? Asked Rita. Saria nodded. Or are we going to wait for half a day? No, we should finish it now. Please go ahead, said Vandali. Okay, said the sisters in unison. Their white buttocks shook side to side as they approached the double-headed Tyrannosaurus, and the glaive and halberd each swung down into one of its two necks. White buttocks indeed. It seemed that Rita and Saria's spirit form skill had increased, allowing them to eat to their heart's content and finally gaining appearances that were no different to those of living people. Like Vandali, their skin was as white as if they had smeared thick candle wax over it, making it difficult to call healthy looking, but it was not really a problem. Saria, the older one, had a reserved appearance with hair flowing down her back to her waist, while Rita's appearance was that of an energetic, beautiful girl with her hair gathered to either side in twin tails. And both of them had figures matching their suits of armor. Their spirit form bodies had previously resembled stick figures or people wearing whole body tights, making it impossible to distinguish whether they were male or female, but now the chest pieces of their armor were bulging without leaving any spare space, their waists were narrow and their buttocks were round and ripe looking. Because one's armor was high leg and the other's was low rise, about half of the air was exposed, too. What a great temptation they are, thought Vandali. His body was still that of a child, so he only had a mental sense of these kinds of things, but he was at an age where it wouldn't be strange for him to fall in love for the first time in a few years if he were an ordinary child. He decided that he would make the two of them start wearing capes before then. Incidentally, when those two had first gained these appearances, they were clamoring about it in high spirits. "Please look, Botchan," Rita had exclaimed. "There isn't any spare space, not even a millimeter. They're filled to the point that there isn't any extra room at all. And my waist is so narrow. I'm really glad that I repeatedly told everyone I'm beautiful and sexy every day. Ewa. This is really delicious, Botchan," Saria had cried. "Mayonnaise, miso and everything else. The Yorkshire ugayaki, dinosaur fritters, flying shark in miso, and I cannot get enough of eating sashimi with fish sauce and wasabi." Rita had been proud of her spirit form body, while Saria had been engrossed in eating all of the different kinds of food she had been unable to eat so far, one after another. "I've made them endure a lot and asked a lot of them. Next time I make a living armor, I should make them learn the spirit form skill right away," Vandali had thought as the two of them manipulated him that day, not verbally, but physically. Spirit form is a skill that grants undead and other creatures not only an appearance, but allows them to physically manifest body parts in place of muscles and bones. As a result, Saria and Rita's strength increased rapidly. Incidentally, as to be expected with high-leg leotard armor and bikini armor, there was no end to the people asking them whether they were sufficiently protected, considering that their suits of armor left them so exposed. No matter how much they resembled humans, spirit form was no more than that, spirit form. Even if their heads were crushed, their chests and stomachs pierced or their exposed thighs were slashed, they didn't have flesh with circulating blood or bones, let alone internal organs. They would feel some pain, but their spirit form bodies were simply extra parts manifested from their main bodies. If it was dangerous, they could simply stop manifesting it and return to being hollow suits of armor. "Botchan, please laugh at my foolishness," Sam said suddenly, looking rather unhappy. "Now I understand why you asked me back then if it was really alright to put my daughters in these suits of armor." Before Sam's eyes were his two daughters, whose bodies were only slightly more covered than if they were wearing nothing but underwear because their armors had wrist guards and leg guards. Their appearances were enough to captivate the eyes of any man. Incidentally, for some reason, there had apparently been no attempts to flirt with them by ghoul males. It was probably because they were Vandali's personal guards. "Well, I didn't think it would be this bad, either," said Vandali. "And there are a lot of ways to solve the problem, like making them wear capes or wrapping them in cloths. But changing the suits of armor would be impossible. They were the main bodies of those two, after all." "Hey, would it be better if I dressed like that as well?" asked Kuka. "Kuka, please stay dressed as you are." Vandali had been asked the same question by Eleonora the other day, so he gave Kuka the same answer. If those two dressed like the living armor sisters, their bodies would lack protection. Kuka in particular, as she didn't have regenerative abilities like Eleonora. Before that, if he made all of the women dress in revealing clothing, it was possible that he would acquire titles like Erotic King or Lust King in addition to his titles of Ghoul King and Eclipse King. These would be titles that caused his social demise if they appeared on his status with no beneficial effects in return. For now, let's move on. "I want to level up before spring comes, too," said Vandali. "Okay," said Rita. "Botchan, I wish to increase my level a little as well," said Sam. "Ah, I leveled up," Kuku exclaimed. "I am finally a level 100 warrior. I can change jobs. Vandali's unarmed fighting technique and blood-sucking skills have leveled up. You have acquired the coordination skill. Name, Saria rank, 6 race, high magic high leg armor level, 35 passive skills, special 5 senses physical ability enhancement, level 4, level up. Water element resistance, level 3, level up. Physical attack resistance, level 3, level up. Active skills, housework, level 2 halberd technique, level 5, level up. Coordination, level 3, level up. Archery, level 3, level up. Spirit form, level 4, level up. Long distance control, level 3, new. Armor technique, level 3, new. Name, Rita rank, 6 race, high magic bikini armor level, 36 passive skills, special 5 senses physical ability enhancement, level 4, level up. Fire element resistance, level 3, level up. Physical attack resistance, level 3, level up. Active skills, housework, level 1 Naginata technique, level 5, level up. Coordination, level 3, level up. Archery, level 2, level up. Throwing, level 1, new. Spirit form, level 4, level up. Long distance control, level 3, new. Armor technique, level 3, new. Title explanation, Eclipse King. The condition for acquiring this title is to become the King of Talersheim while becoming known as the Eclipse King rather than as the Sun King, and being acknowledged as such by over 90% of its inhabitants. Its main effect is that the strengthen followers skill will affect all citizens ruled by the Eclipse King, even if they are humans, elves or dwarves. In addition, it makes it possible for races without the night vision skill can gain the night vision skill, and those without the dark vision skill to gain the dark vision skill. Finally, it makes it possible for those with a weakness to sunlight or moonlight to gain skills with resistance against them. Name, Bormak Gordon age, 65 title, Vampire Hunter job, Demon Crushing Holy Warrior job level, 97 job history, Apprentice Priest Warrior, Priest, Holy Warrior passive skills, Enhanced Senses, level 3 Intuition, level 5 Holy Enhancement, Alder, level 10 Mental Fortitude, level 3 Active Skills, Club Technique, level 9 Armor Technique, level 6 Shield Technique, level 7 Light Attribute Magic, level 6 Life Attribute Magic, level 5 No Attribute Magic, level 1 Mana Control, level 4 Surpass Limits, level 6 Familiar Spirit Descent, level 1 Clergyman, level 5 Commanding, level 3 Coordination, level 4 Unique Skills, Divine Message Receipt, Status Effects, Fanaticism, Religion Aging, Omen. Chapter 58, The Toiling Soldiers and the Eclipse King Serving Beautiful Women. I'll bet on int user, said Vigoro. Hey, Balkus snorted. How naive. I'll be betting on Armor Master. How difficult Zedaris paused to think. How about the Golem Factory Manager? Those golems that are lined up are called a factory, are they not? What are you betting on? Asked Vandali. Vandali had come to the remains of the Adventurers Guild, which should probably be relabeled as a distribution center or trading post, to
Okay. Oh. Okay. So yeah, let's end it here, guys. So this is so far I will go for my sketches. For now, the ogre here, or orc, that I made. I think I need to fix some of the parts and just made it a more more rocky kind of style. Yeah, hard edges, spiky edges and stuff. I think I made a mistake on this arm. I need to fix this later. Um, yeah, arms are really just unpredictable when you start sketching them. I'll I'll try to see if I can fix this next time. Yeah, I just don't want it to be more as consistent as the one on the right. Oh, one on the left. So that I will make something a bit more different and more natural for the left, for the right hand. But yeah, his has big arms, big torso, big head, but small legs. A bit more uh, disproportional, but yeah, I think it could still move properly like a gorilla. Next will be a fat guy, an athletic guy, and an old man, and this skinny guy over here. And I'll do a fat girl. And I'll try a skinny girl, a skinny woman, maybe an old woman, maybe a witch, depends. Very sexy girl, a cartoonish style, and then a athletic girl using a katana. Yeah, This will be my sketch for now. I'll get rid of the yeah, here we go, to make it look clearer. hmm So this is the rough sketches for the next video. But hey, look at this one that I made for the final sketch for here. I think I really made a very good anatomy for her, and yeah, the clothing, the the way I sketched it is far better compared to the previous sketches I did when I sketched her. And this is pretty much really good for my taste. I think I should probably fix this. I want her to wear something, pants that are kind of tilted or on a side view, I don't know. I'm gonna probably change it depending when I start making her character design sheet. Uh, yeah, where I should draw a 360 of her, front view, side view, and back view, so that we can see the entire outfit, and that I can also plan well what I'm gonna do with her. Uh, yeah, but other than that, the sketch that I did for this is pretty cool. I really love the eyes. I think the smile is kind of crooked, but it's a rough sketch, so let's let yeah. Yeah, it's a bit crooked now that I look at it in a different view. But yeah, we can still fix that next time if I decide to finalize this. But this is a rough sketch only, so yeah, don't think it's that very big of a deal. But this is yeah, finalized for this one, and proceed for this next week, or I think I can still stream this Friday. It depends. Uh, yeah, I'm looking forward on sketching all of them because I have some few plans, especially the old dude. I've been holding back and drawing some old people, so I really am very excited in drawing some different age set. I'll probably make this cute sketch here, turn it to a tiny girl, depends. But yeah, other than that, I'm also excited for this. Sketch it in a bit of a low angle. Mm, so yeah, so this is pretty much the plan for next week. I'll be looking forward in sketching this, or probably this Friday, depends if I have additional time to continue this sketching. And for our story for today, if you've seen if you've read, yeah, if you've listened to the story that we've read today, it's pretty cool already. Now we've reached chapter 58 for the next, yeah, for the next stream. But for the previous couple of streams, where we've been introduced of some of the plans of the enemy, and we've been introduced for also with the gods that were against Vida back in the days, and are now plotting against Vandali because they're very sketchy people, very I may say sketchy gods that didn't really like the society evolving in a different way than their plans are, and they're kind of biased to what the Veda's plans were because of them having their own plans, and it's just that it's kind of sad that they could have probably avoided the destruction of their relationship and their this bias towards uh, the goddess, because if they did, maybe there won't be any uh, conflict, and they would have accepted the children of Ida because they are being persecuted right now because they are part monsters and part human, and it's kind of sad that there's that kind of line of discrimination in this kind of story, but it also adds for the interest and the conflict. So yeah, that's also balance our interest in this story. It's also why I really like this type of story also, that there is conflict, problems that are needed to be fixed, and how to fix them. And fixing it is really entertaining. And I really loved how Vandally is tackling the situation just by living life, entertaining himself, trying to live a luxury life, inventing stuff, even food, just to give himself a very nice life, and at the same time discovering things in order to protect his family, his friends, and improving their lifestyle also. So with this, we can see the character is really growing on us because of the way he treats his friends and family, and also it's just going to be a wonderful conclusion also in the near future if all that he is going to do will prove all the gods wrong, including what's the guy who resurrected him again? Uh, Rod Courtney, yeah, Rod Courtney. He will prove him wrong one day, even the main god of that world. I wish that when we get to that part, I would they would really make a art where like the wait, let me show you again the wait, wrong tab. Here we go. So yeah, the illustrations that were made for the stories. So yeah, this is the zombie, I think, that he made, the new zombie that he patch. What's her name again? I can't remember. But she's like a patchwork zombie that Vandally made from the adventurers that attacked the country back then. So yeah, it's a quite interesting design, I may say. For a zombie combined with some few monster parts with wings and yeah, with the face of a little girl, of a young woman, but the body of a uh, built with combined parts of an athlete and a monsters and also a guy. Not to mention her organs are made from wyverns and stuff. It's like oh my goodness, it's definitely a big Frankenstein monster, but in a very very different way. It's interesting. So yeah, this is Vandalise when he was fighting the dragon, I think. No, that's Yabai. Anyway, uh, yeah, I hope that they will make an illustration of that scene if that would ever happen. If they, one day, Vandali will come with blows with the gods that did something wrong against him, and yeah, it will definitely be a very nice art. I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, this is yeah, the armored sisters, Rita and Saria. Yeah, and that's their armored, the leotard and the bikini armor. Oh my goodness, it's so you buy man. How how they were how their souls were put in this armor, and now that they can manifest their bodies, no, their spiritual bodies to look more physical. It is kind of but they are spirits and they're immune to attacks, so it's okay for them. The uh, I can't really wrap how the author managed to justify this kind of uh, yeah, them justifying them wearing this bikini. It's weird, but anyways, let's not go further because I think that's a bit of a spoiler. But yeah, uh, now that we're on the story, also, okay, so one of the adventure parties that murdered his mother, guys, what's his name again? The Great Spear or something. he's there with the vampires, with his slave adventurers also. It's going to be very nice to see what will be their reaction once they face Vandal's army. Now that they're advancing more and more numbers for their group, more monsters that they could control, and more like the treants. I'm imagining the treants are like the ones in Dota 2 or Dota 1, or those the tree like character. Maybe that would I would imagine that they look like that or something when they start the war. And well, Vandali also has a vampire right now, so the vampires won't be that much of a big deal because they would know more about how to defeat those guys. And also, mm, their characters, oh no, the people that are around Vandali right now are pretty much overpowered. Also, they level up a lot due to the adventures they did, the dungeon that they've been farming. So it's pretty much a done deal. I think that will happen, especially Vandali, who has the skill to create golems from anything, whatever he decides to. So this will be a very interesting and fun war that will happen. So I know it's gonna be a bit of a cliffhanger for you guys, but let's look forward to the next stream where I can where we can read more of the story, and definitely we can not be cliffhang again, because it will be a continuous story uh, of the war. Definitely, I feel that that would happen. Now that we are in this chapter, I think. Yeah, for chapter 58, I think it's the last chapter for preparation, and then probably next chapter would be the war. It depends. Mm. So far, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Hope you guys enjoyed my design today, my sketching, and my and the story of the Dead Mage Who Doesn't Want a Fourth Time. I'm looking forward for the next designs that I will make from these sketches that I made here, and I will definitely apply this in my new most of the fan arts and my plans of creating a comics. Yeah, my personal comics in the near future, and also some concept arts. Yeah, I should really have done this far sooner, because I've been just sketching directly without making a lot of plans first, and training my manipulation of objects and, yeah, the shapes. With this, it will really help me. So you guys who are also aspiring to be artists in the near future, definitely try this method. It will help you guys to be more creative in your decisions when you start your own designs or uh, comics that you want to make, because with this you will be exercising your anatomy skills. Definitely will help you a lot. It's helping me a lot already, so I look forward to uh, helping you guys with this kind of sketching practice. Anyway, this is your boy Shrimp. If you've liked this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to seeing you again next time, and also don't forget to also watch some of my streams of Monster Hunter World if you are enjoying my playthrough of that. Uh, I'm looking forward to getting more higher levels, especially reaching Master Rank. And anyway, this is your boy Shrimp. I will see you again next time. Peace.